Chapter 251. He didn't say anything stupid, nor did he reprimand him. Lu Feng knew that if he were there, everything would repeat itself. Therefore, all he could say was praise. Qi Yunqing smiled. However, this smile was very sinister. No need to speak. Your body has already suffered serious injuries. Leave the rest to me. Lu Feng handed Qi Yunqing over to Su Wenchao, who had rushed over. Then, he finally turned around and looked at the people below the stage, who were trembling slightly. At this moment there was still no aura. This was because Lu Feng had already sensed the condition of Qi Yunqing's body. This was a serious injury. If he couldn't get the best treatment, then Lu Feng believed that Qi Yunqing would be crippled for the rest of his life. Even if he could stand up again, his body would become an ordinary person. This was something an exceptional genius at the nebula level couldn't bear. Although Qi Yunqing had only been seriously injured, this injury was equivalent to killing him completely. It was a death to his soul. Lu Feng was furious. Not using his aura wasn't because Lu Feng wasn't furious. On the contrary, Lu Feng was furious. He didn't use his aura because the people in front of him weren't worthy. One step after another, Lu Feng slowly walked down the ring and walked towards Matsuda, who was under the protection of the crowd. Every step he took was monotonous. However, this monotonous pace, which didn't seem to contain any power, made everyone feel as if it was an unstoppable force. It was an indescribable feeling that couldn't be put into words or resisted. Fear, endless fear. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside Lu Feng. It was Director Shui. He had finally made a move. After all, Lu Feng was facing Matsuda. Not to mention the dirty deal between him and Matsuda, just Matsuda's identity was enough for him to take action. However, Director Shui wasn't an idiot. He was just standing on the path that Lu Feng had to take. Then, he spoke with a gloomy look in his eyes. "Student, this is a warrior assessment. You are breaking the rules by coming here rashly. Are you trying to challenge the dignity of my federal university by doing this?" Director Shui had already taken this to a whole new level. He didn't know Lu Feng's identity, but there was one thing he was certain of. Lu Feng was a genius. He was a top-notch genius. Although Lu Feng looked like he was about 17 or 18 years old, he had been able to crush a peak martialist with just one finger. Only martialists, at least at the high-level evolution period, have this kind of strength habit. A 17 or 18-year-old high-level evolution period martial artist, this was definitely something that only a peak second-rate family or a first-rate family's disciple could achieve. Coupled with Lu Feng's terrifying control, Director Shui was even more fearful of him. That was why he had immediately brought the Federal University's name. After all, the Federal University was a terrifying power that even the Yuyo clan was afraid of. However, he thought that if Lu Feng was really just a martialist, even if he was a martialist, he would have stopped. After all, martialists weren't family heads or elders. They only enjoyed resources, but they didn't have much strength. However, Lu Feng wasn't a martialist. He was Lu Feng. He was Lu Feng. Ever since he had started cultivating, Lu Feng hadn't relied on anyone else to possess the strength to dominate the younger generation. Basically, he had relied on his own efforts to walk out of endless killing and blood. In Lu Feng's heart, the relationship between brothers was too important. Lu Feng had already walked in front of Director Shui, but he didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Looking at this scene, Director Shui knitted his brows tightly, but he didn't say anything. He saw the endless coldness in Lu Feng's eyes. In the next moment, he raised his hand, wanting to stop Lu Feng. After all, he had to protect Matsuda today, because this was related to his future. He made his move, and it was very fast. However, someone was faster than him. That was Lu Feng. Lu Feng's move was very simple. He just raised his arm and waved it casually. However, it was this wave that caused everyone to be shocked once again, and they were all dumbfounded. Director Shui was like a cannonball. He was sent flying by Lu Feng's light wave. He even broke through the solid wall of the warrior center and fell outside. How is this possible? How can he be so strong? Is this the strength of a martialist from the younger generation? Director Shui is a martialist in the upheaval phase. With such strength, he was sent flying by a single slap. Who is this young man? How can he be so terrifying? This was too terrifying. This was simply too terrifying. There were many who could send a martialist in the upheaval phase flying with a single slap. However, it shouldn't appear on a young man. Could it be that he's a newly ascended emperor, a young martialist, a newly ascended emperor? This was the only possibility that everyone could think of. They knew that other than the emperor and this young martialist, there shouldn't be anyone who could do this. This was simply unfathomable strength. One step, another step, and another step. Finally, he was only a few steps away from Matsuda. At this moment, everyone automatically opened up a path for him. They weren't idiots. Previously, they were close to Matsuda because he was talented and was the young master of the Matsuda family. However, it was different now. Everyone could see that this young man was definitely 100 times stronger than Matsuda. A young martialist. An emperor. How much resources and power did one need to cultivate someone like that? Since ancient times, almost all the young martialists in the entire universe had a huge background and strong power. This was a theorem. After all, for a young martialist to appear, not only did it require terrifying talent and monstrous aptitude, but it also required the accumulation of resources. Otherwise, no matter how monstrous a genius was, he wouldn't be able to stand out. Obviously, this young martialist in front of them was definitely a terrifying existence with a huge background. Finally, when Lu Feng was about to reach Matsuda, Matsuda was completely terrified. Although his aptitude wasn't bad, even better than Qi Yunqing's, his mental state was too weak. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used such despicable means to take revenge on Qi Yunqing. I'm the young master of the Matsuda family. If you hurt me, no matter what kind of background you have, you'll have to bear the revenge of the Matsuda family. The Matsuda family was a first-class family in the Federation. Most people wouldn't want to offend such a family. Once Matsuda was killed, the Matsuda family would probably go crazy. This wasn't because the Matsuda family valued him, but because it was a matter of face. Therefore, if Lu Feng really killed Matsuda, the Matsuda family would definitely go crazy. The people in the venue watched quietly. They believed that Lu Feng wouldn't make a move after hearing Matsuda's identity. However, these people didn't include 3 people. These 3 people were Mu Shuyan, Su Wenchao, and the seriously injured Qi Yunqing. They knew Lu Feng's identity. He was Dao Songtian's disciple and the direct descendant of the human monarch Lu family. Even the head of the Matsuda family wouldn't dare say anything if he saw any of them. Moreover, he was just the young master of the Matsuda family. The only thing that exceeded their expectations was Lu Feng's strength. Even these people could see how terrifying Lu Feng was. How could they not see it? The 3 of them now knew that Lu Feng actually had the strength of a young martialist. Lu Feng stood in front of Matsuda, still expressionless. However, he didn't make a move. Just when everyone thought that Lu Feng was intimidated by the power of the Matsuda family, Lu Feng smiled. The Matsuda family! What a terrifying power, a smile. It was a smile. It was a cold smile that made everyone tremble in fear. Seeing this smile, everyone was frightened from the bottom of their hearts. They felt their souls trembling. Was the Matsuda family powerful? Without a doubt, they were a first-rate family in the Federation. One had to know that this was an aristocratic family. The definition of an aristocratic family was the bloodline of a god. As for the Matsuda family, they were considered to be one of the top families among the first-rate families. Such a family could be said to be the ruling family of a huge galaxy. Their strength was enough to make anyone tremble in fear. However, when Lu Feng said the word terrifying, it didn't make people feel the slightest fear. What they heard was endless mockery. It was a word that made everyone tremble. Matsuda wasn't an idiot. Although he was frightened to the point of collapse, he was still a descendant of an aristocratic family. Naturally, he could hear the disdain in Lu Feng's voice. He saw that Lu Feng had already raised both his hands. At this moment, Matsuda finally went crazy. He finally forgot everything. Suddenly, he took out a crystal from his bosom. This was his last hope. It was his final trump card to save his life. It could be said that the biggest reason why Matsuda dared to come to the Cymbidium without bringing any family guards was because of the crystal in his hands. Lu Feng also recognized this crystal. It was called the Guardian Crystal. Previously, his cousin Lu Feng had given him one. Later, not only the Lu family's ancestor, even Dao Songtian had given Lu Feng a few. However, Lu Feng also understood that the guardian crystal in the hands of the young master of the Song family in front of him was absolutely incomparable to the few guardian crystals in his hands. After all, the one who gave Lu Feng these things was either the virtual king or the Void Emperor. You forced me to do this. You forced me to do this. I want you to die. This time, no one can protect you. Prepare to bear the wrath of God. Prepare to bear the wrath of my Song family. Crazy, completely crazy. Matsuda understood that if he didn't use the guardian crystal for cultivation or passively encountered danger, his position as the young master would be in jeopardy. After all, in the Song family, Matsuda wasn't the only direct disciple. Seeing Matsuda take out the guardian crystal, Lu Feng just smiled coldly. It could be said that it was very easy for him to stop it. However, Lu Feng didn't do so. That was because he wanted to communicate with the higher-ups of the Song family. Now, Lu Feng understood a lot of things. He knew that in these large clans, other than those geniuses with shocking talent, the others were dispensable. Even the young master was the same. After all, these big families didn't lack young masters the least. Matsuda's talent was not bad, that was true, but that was it. At best, he was a Federation-level genius. Such a genius was hard to come by even in a second-rate clan or an aristocratic family. However, in the eyes of the first-rate families of God's descendants, it was still nothing. After all, in every generation of the first-rate families of God's descendants, almost all of the direct disciples were Federation-level geniuses. Although he still didn't know what the situation was, this matter was related to his brother, so Lu Feng planned to solve it in one go. That was because he was really afraid of trouble. Chapter 252. In the end, the crystal was completely shattered. At that moment, a sparkling light screen appeared and protected Matsuda. Matsuda's appearance became even more ferocious as he was protected by the light screen. He looked at Lu Feng and then at Qi Yunqing, who was behind Lu Feng. His eyes were filled with endless ruthlessness and bloodlust. Matsuda knew that he would be fine this time. But what about the future? He would definitely be attacked by those in the family who opposed him because of this matter. In the end, the other party would win. He would be completely cut off from his glorious identity as the young master of the Song family. He hated Lu Feng. While the young ruler's identity was frightening, once this person went crazy, he would not remember anything. He knew that if it had not been for Lu Feng's existence, he would have been admitted to the Federal University as a special student. If he had relied on the Song family's operations, he would have been able to obtain countless resources at the Federal University. He would have been able to soar into the sky and soar like a dragon. However, all of this had been completely shattered because of this indifferent figure in front of him. Therefore, he hated Lu Feng. Regardless of Lu Feng's identity, he still hated him. However, he hated the half-crippled figure even more. Because all of this was because of him. If it had not been for him, how could he have lost all of this? Matsuda thought a lot at that moment. He had already decided that when the family's divine ancestor arrived, he would not care about anything else. He would kill Qi Yunqing first, followed by Lu Feng. Matsuda knew that he had the qualifications to do so. Although he was destined to lose his identity as the young master of the Song family, he still had it. Therefore, given the order and request of the young master, as well as the fact that the two of them had insulted the Song family's reputation, Matsuda was certain that the divine ancestor would definitely take action. The surrounding people had already started to retreat and distance themselves from the scene. Most of them knew about the existence of the guardian crystal. It could only be condensed by a god-level existence. Once it was activated, it could definitely block a powerful attack from a powerhouse of the same level. Of course, the reason why the Guardian Crystal was called the Guardian Crystal was not only because it could block a blow. The most important thing was that once it was activated, the giver who was far away in space and time could connect the space-time tunnel in the shortest possible time and directly appear beside the user. The Guardian Crystal meant that it was being guarded by an existence above the level of the gods. Therefore, these people knew that the use of the Guardian Crystal signified the descent of the god. At this moment, they hoped to leave with Lu Feng as far away as possible. They didn't want to be misunderstood by that god. If that happened, they would definitely be affected and die. These people naturally did not wish to encounter such a situation. Seeing the actions of the surrounding people, and listening to Matsuda's crazy clamor, Su Wenchao's eyes flashed with a trace of ridicule. Gods? Were gods scary? Or perhaps it was truly terrifying. After all, apart from the children of the powerful families, no one had ever seen a god. It could be said that the existence of gods was the most terrifying existence in the world in the hearts of ordinary people. It was a great existence that even technology could not compare to. Therefore, these people held a devout attitude toward the god. Gods were really powerful and terrifying. However, this was only scary to ordinary people, or to ordinary martial artists and psychic masters who did not have any powerful background. To them, deities were only powerful in terms of strength. Other than that, there was really nothing else. Of course, this was only for them. If it was Lu Feng, Su Wenchao understood that if the god of the Song family was not an idiot, he would know how to choose in the void. A powerful fluctuation appeared. This was the terrifying majesty brought about when a god tore through the void and descended. At this moment, the entire Cymbidium was once again in an uproar. They did not know why there were gods descending one after another in the past year. This kind of treatment was impossible even for a first-level habitable planet. In the sky, a figure slowly walked out. Powerful, powerful, powerful to an unimaginable extent. With just a glance, everyone present felt fear in their hearts. It was a kind of trembling that came from the soul. Li Tianlai had arrived. He stood in front of the center of the warriors with a cold gaze. Although he was only a demigod, one should not forget his identity. He was a psychic demigod. He was the principal of the Cymbidium branch of the Federal University and the disciple of Dao Songtian. He was also the successor of the Dongru Great Emperor, a peerless powerhouse of the foreign tribe in the past. Li Tianlai had seen gods before. Although it could not be said that there were hundreds or thousands of them, there were definitely more than 100 of them. Therefore, just by feeling this aura, Li Tianlai was already certain that this descending god was just an ordinary god. Moreover, it was the kind of god that was achieved by an ordinary martial artist. He might not be able to fight against such a god, but Li Tianlai was not the least bit afraid. I wonder which senior has descended on the Federal University. Li Tianlai flew into the sky and looked at the descending figure without the slightest intention of retreating. His voice was extremely loud, and it spread throughout the world, causing everyone to focus their attention on him. Hearing Li Tianlai's words, the being that slowly walked out of the crack in the void had a cold gaze. However, someone like Li Tianlai could still see the fear in this god's eyes. He was not afraid of Li Tianlai. After all, although Li Tianlai was a psychic demigod, he had not reached the level of a god. A demigod would always be a demigod. It was impossible to challenge him now. However, when he thought of the Federal University behind Li Tianlai, this god from the Song family was still afraid. Others might not know, but as a god-level being, he naturally knew how terrifying the Federal University was. Its power and mystery were definitely not weaker than the other two superpowers. The Song family alone had no chance of contending against it. However, when he thought of the shattering of the Guardian Crystal, he still spoke. I sensed that the person I was protecting was in danger, so I came here. Although the Song family cannot be compared to the Federal University, if the young master of the Song family is in danger here, we will seek justice even if we have to appeal to the alliance of aristocratic families. Hearing this, Li Tianlai fell silent. In the eyes of others, the Song family was a superior first-rate aristocratic family. They were even one of the stronger ones. However, in the eyes of the Federal University they were just SOSO. They did not need to use much power to deal with him. However, the alliance of aristocratic families mentioned by the Song family's god made Li Tianlai feel a little bit of fear. The alliance of aristocratic families was a superpower formed by close to 100 first-rate aristocratic families and families, as well as 6 super-aristocratic families and families. In the human race, it was the fourth superpower after the Lu family, the Federation government, and the Federal University. Although the alliance seemed loose, once they gathered together, their power was still quite strong. Li Tianlai understood that although the young master of the Song family was not worthy of the alliance of aristocratic families taking action, it would be different if the Song family was included. Especially since this matter involved the Federal University. The young master of the Song family, Li Tianlai, frowned slightly. After a while, he finally remembered. My Federal University's Cymbidium branch is one of the 3 supreme martial artists of this batch. Is Matsuda the young master of the Song family? Hearing that Li Tianlai could say Matsuda's name, the Song family's god nodded slightly. Alright, don't stop me. I can sense the weakening of the Guardian Crystal's power. I want to see who exactly dares to challenge the dignity of the Song family. After saying this, the Song family's god finally walked down the stairway and appeared on the dome of the Federal University. Facing such a furious god, Li Tianlai could not stop him. Although he had countless trump cards and was not afraid of such a god, it was obvious that he was in the wrong. Moreover, Li Tianlai also wanted to see this matter. Therefore, Li Tianlai did not say anything. Finally, standing on the dome, the Song family's god made his move. With a gentle wave of his arm, all the buildings above the Warrior Center suddenly disappeared. The Warrior Center Hall was not inferior to the Psychic Center at all. It was a huge building that was close to the landscape. Unless a supreme martial artist made a move, it would take a lot of time. Otherwise, it would not be damaged at all. However, in the hands of the god, it was completely annihilated with a gentle wave of his arm. There was no smoke or fire, no turbulence. Everything was peaceful and calm. At that moment, the situation around the ring appeared in front of everyone. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the Song family's god in the sky. Matsuda, who was under the protection of the Guardian Crystal, had already gone crazy. He laughed and looked at Lu Feng with hatred, then looked at Qi Yunqing, who was about to faint. Ancestor, please make a move and kill this madman who dares to challenge the dignity of the Song family. Matsuda was already kneeling on the ground, restraining all the hatred in his eyes. He looked at the Song family's god with a pious and fanatical expression. However, the Song family's god did not immediately make a move. He just looked at Lu Feng coldly. He was not Matsuda. Naturally, he could easily see Lu Feng's realm. Peak evolution period martial artist. This was Lu Feng's highest strength, and this kind of strength made him fearful. The Song family's god could naturally see Lu Feng's age. Not even 18 years old. A peak evolution period martial artist who was not even 18 years old. Any one of them was nothing in his eyes. However, when these two conditions were combined, the Song family's god could not help but be afraid. Because such strength already belonged to the young supreme martial artist, the edge of being an emperor. For a person with such strength, there must be a huge force behind him. If Matsuda was his direct descendant, if he did not have the Song family behind him, if he was not the Song family's god, then perhaps he would not consider so much. After all, with the existence of a god, why would he need a reason to kill a martial artist? However, all of these were ifs, and all of these ifs did not exist. Therefore, he needed to consider the Song family. After all, Matsuda was only a young master of the Song family. Other than him, there were many people in the Song family who had the ability to become a young master. For such an insignificant young master, it was unwise to rashly make a peerless enemy for the Song family. Chapter 253. Is it you who wants to challenge the dignity of the Song family? Lu Feng's expression remained indifferent even after hearing the godly spirit's words. Deity? Perhaps he was really powerful. However, Lu Feng had seen existences that far surpassed deities. He, Lu Feng, had even seen the traces of 3 epic overlords and an eternal celestial emperor. He was someone who even dared to challenge the strongest person since ancient times, the human monarch, with his fists. He did not feel uncomfortable at all when facing the dignity of a deity. He frowned slightly because he realized that although the deity was asking a question, it was obviously directed at him. However, his frown only lasted for a moment before it relaxed. Lu Feng did not need to consider so much. His greatness came from the depths of his fate. He was the noblest existence that even fate had to acknowledge. He was the Emperor Lu Feng. He did not need to care about other people's opinions. Lu Feng said slowly and solemnly, "Challenge? You can see it however you want. Perhaps I'm really going to challenge the dignity of the Song family." The aura around the deity from the Song family started to surge violently when he heard that. However, he still did not make a move because he could feel that Lu Feng was fearless. At that moment, the deity from the Song family understood that this young man probably had a powerful background. Reason, he only said 2 words. He was a deity, an extremely noble and great existence. It was already a great favor for him to be able to speak to a martialist who did not have the bloodline of the Song family. Of course, Lu Feng did not care about that. He only smiled and looked mockingly at the pious young master of the Song family who was kneeling on the ground. Because he hurt my brother and the Song family seems to be standing behind him. Therefore, I'm going to challenge you. Lu Feng's humility was well known. Although he was noble and proud. However, he had never been so extreme and overbearing before. Now, for his brother, Lu Feng changed his usual image and finally revealed the dignity of an emperor. Who is your brother? Looking at the god in the sky, all the Federal University students had a strange feeling in their hearts. In their opinion, after this god descended, he should have gone on a killing spree. He should have immediately killed Lu Feng. Unlike now, this lowly was nagging him for a reason. Lu Feng's smile widened. However, there was a lot of coldness in his smile. He pointed at Qi Yunqing in Su Wenchao's arms and slowly said, "It's him, Qi Yunqing of the Qi family." Hearing Lu Feng's explanation, the god was slightly taken aback but quickly reacted. Although Qi Yunqing's family was only a second-rate family and not even an aristocratic family, they were still very familiar with each other. At this moment, they heard that Lu Feng wanted to provoke a first-rate family, the Song family, for the sake of a second-rate family. This was truly a joke. It was simply inconceivable. However, the deity from the Song family did not laugh. Instead, he was furious. At this moment, He no longer thought about anything else. No matter what the reason was, he only knew that the life of the Song family's young master was threatened. He had descended here to protect Matsuda and wipe out anyone who dared to challenge the Song family's dignity. You are courting death. The supreme voice was the voice of a god, which carried the supreme divine power. Under this voice, many students felt the world shake, and they all felt as if the end of the world had come. The deity's wrath made the sky and earth weep. This was a supreme divine power. Finally, the giant hand formed by the deity was about to fall and completely obliterate Lu Feng. However, at this moment, a figure appeared in the path of the deity's massacre. This person was Li Tianlai. To be honest, the deity from the Song family was extremely afraid of Li Tianlai. After all, he did not dare to underestimate Li Tianlai's identity. Looking at Li Tianlai, the deity's face frowned slightly. At this moment, the sky and earth shook again. This was a divine power. Li Tianlai, are you still afraid that I will hurt your students? Although I am not a monstrous deity, my control is good enough. I think that if I take action, it will not affect the others. The deity from the Song family thought that Li Tianlai had appeared to protect the students. However, he was wrong. Li Tianlai smiled faintly as if he did not feel the monstrous divine power at all. Senior, this is the Federal University. The students here are the guardians of the Federal University. You cannot touch any of them. Moreover, this time, I am not only protecting the other students, but also the person you want to kill. Li Tianlai said the last sentence softly. Only Lu Feng, the deity from the Song family, could hear him clearly. The deity from the Song family hesitated slightly. After all, Li Tianlai's actions undoubtedly proved that Lu Feng was a person of great status. However, after thinking about it for a while, his face became gloomy again. After all, Lu Feng regarded Qi Yunqing, a disciple from a second-rate family, as a brother. Given the arrogance of a genius, he would only become friends with people of similar status or even brothers. Therefore, in his eyes, Lu Feng's status was not that noble. The pressure was strengthened once again. The deity from the Song family was on the verge of exploding with anger. He has offended the dignity of the Song family. Moreover, he has admitted it. I believe that you are also aware of the rules of the Federation and the Ancient Covenant. The Ancient Covenant was set up to protect the geniuses of the Federation. Of course, there was one more rule. The deities could take action against those who offended the dignity of the deity family. However, Li Tianlai still smiled slightly when he heard this. He did not want to wait any longer and said directly, "But you can't kill this person, and you don't dare to kill him. That's because he's my junior brother, the new disciple of my teacher, Dao Songtian." This time, Li Tianlai did not lower his voice. Instead, he said it out loud. In an instant, everyone heard it. They looked at Lu Feng with incredulity in their eyes. Lu Feng was a warrior. There was no doubt about that. He was even a young supreme warrior who could be titled as an emperor. However, how could a supreme warrior become the disciple of Dao Songtian, the #1 psychic in the world? However, since it was Li Tianlai who said it, these people would definitely believe it. Therefore, at this moment, these students were all shocked by Lu Feng's current identity. Hearing Li Tianlai's words, the deity of the Song family finally stopped what he was doing. The one he did not want to offend the most was the Federal University. After all, it was one of the top 3 forces. The Federal University was famous for being aloof from worldly affairs. However, if they were to offend it, the Song family would be attacked like never before. After all, even in the alliance of aristocratic families, many of the family heads were Dao Songtian's disciples. Therefore, just the identity of Dao Songtian's disciple made the deity of the Song family understand that Lu Feng could not be killed. However, Lu Feng had openly challenged the dignity of the Song family. He could not be killed, but he still had to be punished. If that's the case, then I'll give face to the Federal University and His Majesty, Dao Songtian, some face. However, while he can avoid death, he can't escape punishment. He has offended the dignity of the Song family. We have to punish him no matter what. Otherwise, how will the Song family have a foothold in the Federation? This was already the biggest concession he could make. If the target of the punishment was really an ordinary disciple like Dao Songtian, then this would be the best solution. After all, the dignity of an aristocratic family was not to be offended. However, as he looked at the deity of the Song family in the sky, Li Tianlai still smiled faintly. He actually shook his head. Even if this is a punishment, it won't do. Not only that, but the Song family will also have to publicly admit their mistakes. After all, it was the young master of the Song family who provoked brother Lu Feng first. Li Tianlai was going to be domineering to the end. When he heard this, the deity of the Song family was a little dazed. However, after a while, he smiled. Smiling didn't just mean that he was happy. Sometimes, smiling also meant that he was furious. The deity of the Song family was furious. Good, good, good. What a great federal university. What a great Li Tianlai. Since that's the case, then I will punish him today. If you try to stop me, then I will punish you as well. After all, the aristocratic family alliance won't stand by and do nothing about this matter. Even though there were many disciples of Dao Songtian in the aristocratic family alliance, they probably wouldn't speak up to stop such an overbearing act. However, when he heard this, Li Tianlai continued to smile. He laughed softly, laughed loudly, and laughed wildly. Finally, he stretched out his finger and pointed at the deity of the Lu family in the sky. You want to punish him? You think you are worthy of punishing him? Who do you think you are? You are just an ordinary deity. Your family is just a first-rate aristocratic family. What right do you have to punish Lu Feng? Lu Feng is the disciple of my teacher, Dao Songtian. He is my teacher's direct disciple. Even if he offended the aristocratic family alliance, you can't punish him. Moreover, even if Lu Feng isn't my teacher's disciple, just based on his surname, you don't have the right to punish him. Dao Songtian's direct disciple. This title really shocked the deity of the Song family. However, his shock wasn't over yet, because the following words made the deity of the Song family fall into deep thought. A moment later, a trace of distortion flashed across his face, and a trace of disbelief appeared on his face. This was because he had already figured it out. Li Tianlai said that Lu Feng's surname was Lu Feng. Moreover, Li Tianlai had already said it before. This person was called Lu Feng. Then, to be able to make the aristocratic family alliance not dare to punish him and not have the right to punish him, even if his surname was Lu, only the human king Lu family. This was publicly recognized as the #1 aristocratic family in the universe. This federation's 3 superpowers might even be the strongest power. He is actually a descendant of the Lu family. He's the direct descendant of the Lu family. In the Lu family, only the direct descendant could have such treatment. Therefore, he was already certain. Li Tianlai no longer had a smile on his face. At this moment there was only a kind of coldness. That's right. Lu Feng is the descendant of the Lu family. He's the direct descendant of the Lu family. Moreover, I think you should know about his parents. His father is called Lu Tao. His title is God Slayer. Boom! In an instant, the deity of the Song family felt that the world was spinning. He was actually the descendant of the human king Lu family's peerless God Slayer. It was his son. The human king Lu family might be really powerful, but the Lu family had caused chaos in the human race for 500 years. They were also reasonable. No matter how domineering they were, they couldn't threaten the safety of the Song family. However, God Slayer was different. His name was completely made up of the lives of hundreds of millions of races, monstrous talents and geniuses, and the blood of countless deities. For a deity like him, God-Slayer Lu Tao probably wouldn't even bother to make a move, because he really wasn't qualified. Once they offended God-Slayer, then perhaps even the aristocratic family alliance wouldn't be able to protect their Song family. After all, the human King Lu family was a peak power even more terrifying than the aristocratic family alliance. Chapter 254. A year ago, Lu Tao had appeared and killed the head of the Han family. Of course, he was just the head of the Han family, so it was not worth paying attention to. After all, the Han family was just a second-rate family in the Jingyun galaxy. However, the head of the Han family was an incredible figure. That was Han Emperor, one of the 5 pinnacle emperors of the Golden Generation. He was the pinnacle of the Emperor of Massacre, a terrifying monster who was about to become the King of Massacre. And his realm was that of a true god. Han Emperor's combat power was not weaker than an ordinary heavenly god. And yet, such a terrifying entity had been killed by the God-Slayer. The deity of the Song family knew that there were some hidden ancestors in the Song family. However, no matter how strong these ancestors were, they would not be much stronger than Han Emperor. Lu Tao could kill Han Emperor, so naturally, he could also kill the Song family. The deity of the Song family was completely stunned. The many students below who knew about Lu Feng's identity were also stunned. As for Matsuda, the young master of the Song family, he was almost dumbfounded. He knew that he had poked a hole in the sky. In fact, he had even poked a hole in the biggest sky among the younger generation of the Federation. Why? Does the Song family still want to punish Lu Feng? At this moment, Li Tianlai looked at the deity of the Song family in the sky with a playful expression, waiting for him to speak. The deity of the Song family stood in place. His expression was extremely strange, and it changed countless times in an instant. At this moment, his heart was filled with complicated emotions. If he had agreed to the punishment but did not carry it out, then his dignity as a deity would be damaged. However, if he were to talk about punishment, he really did not dare to. Even if he was a lone deity, he still did not dare to. If he really killed the direct descendant of the human king here, then, not to mention the entire human federation, even the entire universe would not have a place for him to hide. After all, although almost all the races in the universe were looking forward to the fall of the human monarch bloodline, none of them had truly made a move. This was because they were all afraid. The more powerful an existence was, the more they could understand the terror of the human King Lu family. 300 years ago, the peerless progenitor of the human King Lu family walked out of his decadence and killed the peerless divine king of the demon race. The battle between the Demon King and the Demon King shook the Milky Way and silenced millions of races. And it was also because of that battle that the Lu family brought chaos to the human race for 500 years. If the Federal University was mysterious, then human King's Lu family was terrifying. Even in the mysterious Federal University, they were not as powerful as the human King Lu family, who was able to inflict serious damage to any of the pinnacle races on the surface. Moreover, they didn't know if there was still a supreme progenitor in the Lu family who was still unconscious. If this was the case, then even the apex races would have to retreat. Finally, with a long sigh, the god of the Song family took one last look at the young master of the Song family, then turned around and left. However, as his figure disappeared, a voice was slowly heard. From now on, Matsuda is no longer the young master of the Song family. Crippling a publicly recognized young master of a first-rate divine descendant family was undoubtedly a great privilege. If he was a true god, then it wouldn't matter. However, he was just an ordinary god, so this was a bit of overstepping his authority. However, those who were able to enter the Federal University weren't idiots, so they understood after thinking about it for a while. This matter involved the human king Lu family. Moreover, the direct descendant of the Lu family was even the personal disciple of the current number 1 Psyche Master, Dao Songtian. Such an identity was really too shocking. And the decision to overstep his authority was probably because he had no other choice. Slowly, the terrifying crack in the sky disappeared. Among the many existences, the god of the Song family had already left. At this moment, the students who had recovered all looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with disbelief, as if they were in a dream. Yes, everything that they had experienced today was really like a dream to them. Gods had already appeared in their dreams. However, the identity of the young man in front of them now was an existence that even gods were willing to give up all their glory and even abandon their family heirs. He was a newly ascended emperor of the younger generation. This was something that no one could deny. After all, his power was already on the verge of becoming an emperor. Coupled with the number 1 bloodline in the universe, he definitely had the unparalleled combat power of a young paragon. He could definitely become an emperor. On top of the human king bloodline and the status of a newly ascended emperor, there was also the title of the current number 1 Psyche Master's disciple. It could be said that this young man's identity was already unique in the current era. Lu Feng didn't care about these people. He also didn't look at Matsuda, who was in the shattered light screen. He walked quietly in front of Qi Yunqing and shook his head helplessly. Brothers are meant to help each other. Brothers' matters are their own matters. Therefore, don't choose to bear it alone just because you care about something. Although Lu Feng didn't say anything specific, Qi Yunqing understood. Lu Feng was blaming him. He was blaming him for bearing the burden alone. Qi Yunqing wasn't annoyed by this silent accusation. He knew that Lu Feng really cared about him. It could be said that if Lu Feng hadn't happened to come here, then what awaited him wouldn't have been as simple as being humiliated. It was even possible that he would have been crippled for the rest of his life. He nodded his head gently but solemnly. At this moment, a smile appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. It was a kind of comforting smile. He knew that Qi Yunqing understood. What do you plan to do with this person? Lu Feng pointed at the young master of the Song family, who seemed to have lost his mind, and asked indifferently. Just now, he had only been angry for a moment. Whether or not he killed the young master of the Song family didn't matter to Lu Fenglai. However, deep in his heart, he didn't really like killing. When he saw that Lu Feng had handed everything over to him, Qi Yunqing fell silent. Although he had a lot of hatred for Matsuda at this moment, the strong hatred had disappeared too much. Although he still hated Matsuda at this moment, it had disappeared too much. Looking at Matsuda's state, Qi Yunqing knew that Matsuda was probably crippled for the rest of his life. After a slight struggle, Qi Yunqing finally sighed. He exhausted the last of his strength and slowly said, "Lu Feng, the punishment that should have been meted out has already been meted out. As for him, forget it." When he heard this, Lu Feng shrugged indifferently. This was Qi Yunqing's matter. Since Qi Yunqing had made such a choice, Lu Feng wouldn't say anything. "Okay, now the matter has been resolved. Hurry up and get treated. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you will be crippled before you enter the Federal University." Without waiting for Qi Yunqing to say anything, Su Wenchao had already carried Qi Yunqing outside. As he walked, he shouted that Qi Yunqing was too heavy and that he would eat him to death. When he saw this, Lu Feng smiled faintly. He knew that although Su Wenchao was a psychic, in terms of physical strength, he was stronger than ordinary people. At the very least, carrying Qi Yunqing on his back was nothing. When he saw the figure appear beside him, Lu Feng's expression turned solemn. He said, "Senior brother, thank you very much this time." Li Tianlai smiled faintly and waved his hand gently. "What are you thanking me for? You are my junior brother. It is my duty to stand up for you. Besides, whether I am here or not, it doesn't matter to you. Li Tianlai also understood that as a direct descendant of the human king Lu family, even a real virtual king powerhouse wouldn't be able to kill him, let alone an ordinary god. After all, this was the Federation. However, I hope that junior brother doesn't mind that I have exposed your identity, Lu Feng shrugged indifferently. Back then, he had hidden his identity because his strength had been too low. He wouldn't have been able to deal with any one of the younger generation. However, things were different now. Although in the eyes of those powerhouses, his current strength was still insufficient, it wasn't that difficult to deal with the younger generation. At the very least, when he unleashed his full combat power, he would be considered a powerhouse among the younger generation who was 5 or 6 years older than him. As for Lu Feng, he already knew his future path when he was in the massacre abyss. Just as he had said to Tu Tianxian, if he wanted to set foot on the supreme peak and surpass the primogenitor human king, then he would have to achieve the ultimate limit. Only in this way would he have the possibility of surpassing the human king. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't really care whether his identity had been exposed or not. All right, senior brother. I will go and see Qi Yunqing. Let me know when you have decided on the time to head to the general hospital. After saying this and bidding farewell to Li Tianlai, Lu Feng finally left the warriors' center. When Lu Feng and Li Tianlai both disappeared, the entire warriors' center went into an uproar. In an instant, countless clamors shook the entire center. Many of the people there were disciples from clans. They had all come because of the specially recruited quota. Therefore, when they found out about Lu Feng's identity, the first thing they did was to inform their clans directly. After all, the appearance of the 5th lineal descendant of the human king's Lu family was definitely an earth-shattering event in the Federation. Furthermore, the human king's lineal descendant this time was actually the child of Lu Tao, who had slain God. His master was the #1 telekinesis master of the current era. However, the people from the clans who had received the news weren't idiots. They didn't dare spread this kind of news easily. Although this was the first time Lu Feng had revealed his identity, there were still very few people and clans who truly knew about him. Furthermore, most of them were only at the lowest level. Qi Yunqing's injuries were indeed very serious. If he had been an ordinary person, he would have been done for. Unfortunately, he wasn't. Plus, he had a good brother. Thanks to Li Tianlai's arrangements, the General Hospital had sent over a lot of invaluable divine medicines. Among them, there were even elixirs. It was thanks to these elixirs that Qi Yunqing's condition had finally been averted. Of course, if it was just for treatment, many hospitals would have been able to do it. However, Lu Feng wanted to preserve everything that Qi Yunqing had. Because of this, he had used something as terrifying as elixirs. Fortunately, Qi Yunqing had been saved. After everything was done, Lu Feng let out a long sigh of relief. Do you have any plans, Lu Feng? There are still more than 3 months before school officially starts. Mu Shuyan looked at Lu Feng expectantly. Li Tianlai's message had just arrived. The official time to enter the general hospital would be 3 months later, when the school term would start. Most of the people who hadn't passed the assessment would still have to face the final exam. They still had to face the final exam, but for these 10 people who had already passed, it naturally didn't matter. Therefore, Su Wenchao, Mu Shuyan, and Lu Feng had honorably skipped class. Chapter 255. I don't have any plans for this period of time. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng really didn't have any specific plans. Originally, he planned to go to the human king's Lu family and enter the road of inheritance to read the human king's scripture in hopes of comprehending the existence of realm. However, there was no need for that now. After all, he was already completely there. In terms of martial arts, he had already reached the peak of his current stage. It could be said that among the evolution stage warriors, there was no one in the world who could surpass him. As for the psychic aspect, it would be impossible to continue without a year's time. It was the same for those who comprehended the nature. They were all restricted by Lu Feng's realm and could no longer continue. Therefore, Lu Feng really had nothing to do now. Of course, if he had to say that he had something to do, Lu Feng still had two things to do. The first thing was to refine pills. After all, he could refine pills now, and they were even at the peak of the intermediate 4th grade pills. However, in terms of quantity, he was still lacking by a lot. However, if he wanted to refine pills, he needed to go to the capital administrative planet. Lu Feng had just returned from there. He didn't plan to go back immediately. As for refining pills, he would wait until school started. The other thing was to return to the Lu family and enter the road of inheritance to read the human king's scripture. However, this time, it wasn't to comprehend realm. What he wanted to comprehend was the 4th step of the martial arts path that surpassed realm, qi. Of course, in addition to this, Lu Feng really wanted to learn the human king scripture. Although he had 3 major martial arts techniques and even miracles, unfortunately these couldn't be used casually. If he used the soul supremacy, it would definitely be a moment of desperation. If he used the great demon never die, he would need to fully activate the power of the great demon. Fully activating the power of the great demon meant that Lu Feng had to go all out. As for I am the Emperor, this could be used. However, if he used it under normal circumstances, the power was really too small. Only when the bloodline was fully activated and the noble aura was completely restored could I am the Emperor display its most powerful power. Therefore, the current Lu Feng was very embarrassed. He didn't have a martial skill that he could use at will. Because of this, Lu Feng wanted to return to the Lu family and learn the supreme martial arts from the Mortal King's scripture. Unfortunately, Lu Feng thought so and had such plans, but he couldn't contact Lu Tao. If there were no God Spirit elites tearing space to open a path, it would take at least a month or 2 to reach the primogenitor planet, and the round trip would take 3 to 4 months. In this case, most of the time would be spent on the journey. Therefore, Lu Feng extinguished this idea. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't have anything to do now. Upon hearing Lu Feng's reply, Mu Shuyan's eyes lit up. She was about to speak when Su Wenchao, who was beside her, spoke first. Sun Xiaofeng, since you don't have anything else to do, then come to my Su family. I'm going home now, so you can come to my house and have some fun. Su Wenchao didn't finish his last few words, because he already felt a kind of killing intent that soared to the sky. When he saw Mu Shuyan, who was standing beside Lu Feng, he couldn't bring himself to say the last few words. What's wrong? Is the Su family very interesting? Although her voice was unusually sweet, Su Wenchao felt as if it came from the depths of hell. It made his heart tremble with fear. No. Nothing. Su Wenchao fiercely swallowed his saliva. At this moment, his wretched eyes turned slightly and he suddenly revealed an even more wretched smile. The green underworld galaxy is not bad. However, compared to the Sky Clouds galaxy, it is still a little lacking. If we could go to the Sky Clouds galaxy, then it would be really comfortable. Su Wenchao slapped himself on the head and looked at Mu Shuyan with a look of surprise. I remember that Miss Mu's Mu family is in the Tianyun galaxy, right? If that's the case, can I trouble Miss Mu? When she saw Su Wenchao being so cooperative, the coldness in Mu Shuyan's eyes finally disappeared and was replaced by a look of joy and excitement. She looked at Lu Feng and quickly said, That's right. The scenery of the Sky Clouds galaxy is very famous in the entire Federation. After saying this, she looked at Lu Feng expectantly. At this time, Su Wenchao could only shrug helplessly. According to his thinking, since he had done such a big favor, he should at least show some gratitude in his eyes. Unfortunately, Mu Shuyan didn't seem to see anything. She only had eyes for Lu Feng. When he saw Mu Shuyan's expectant eyes, Lu Feng hesitated slightly. Actually, Lu Feng wasn't an idiot. Although he didn't know much about relationships, Mu Xuyan's behavior over the past few days had made Lu Feng understand that this girl liked him. However, Lu Feng had a strange feeling about Mu Xuyan. To be honest, this girl's temperament and appearance were already top-notch among her peers in the Federation. However, Lu Feng had always had a complicated feeling about her. The first time he had seen Mu Xuyan was in the Sky Network. At the time, he had entered the telekinesis hall for the first time and seen Mu Xuyan for the first time. It had also been the first time he had felt his heart race. However, as he became stronger, a figure would appear in his mind for no reason. Lu Feng couldn't see it clearly, but he could feel that this figure was extremely important in his heart. Lu Feng didn't know why, but the constant appearance of this figure made it seem as if there was no room for anyone else in his heart. This was incomparably strange. Lu Feng had also wondered whether this influence in his heart really existed. However, in the end, when he denied it, that figure would always appear. Therefore, Lu Feng had already decided that he wouldn't accept anyone before he understood everything. This anyone naturally included Mu Xuyan. However, when he saw Mu Xuyan's expectant expression, Lu Feng couldn't say no. After hesitating for a while, he finally nodded his head. When she saw that Lu Feng had finally agreed, Mu Xuyan's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. Although she tried her best to hide it, even Su Wenchao, who was beside her, could clearly feel this surprise. What about Yunqing? The three of them had escaped and skipped class. However, Qi Yunqing was still lying on the hospital bed and groaning. At this time, Su Wenchao spoke. Him? That kid is too unjust. He didn't even say anything about such a big thing. He asked for it. He deserves it. In that case, let him lie down. Anyway, didn't the doctor say that? After taking the elixir, he should be able to get out of bed in 2 months. So during this time, let him recuperate in peace. Su Wenchao's meaning was already very clear. That was to completely abandon Qi Yunqing. When he heard this, Lu Feng felt that this was a bit wrong. At this time, Su Wenchao spoke again. Xiaofeng, don't hesitate. This brat deserved it for not being loyal to his friends. This time, he should reflect on his actions. Besides, didn't the doctors say that he needs to rest well? Otherwise, his recovery will take a long time. When he heard this, Lu Feng felt that it was reasonable, so he didn't hesitate anymore. Since he had already decided, then naturally he would discuss when to leave. According to Mu Xuyan, they should leave immediately. As for the airship ticket that Su Wenchao mentioned, it would naturally be counted on Miss Mu's head. However, considering the negative impact, Lu Feng still insisted on leaving after the final examination. Both of them knew that the principal, Li Tianlai, was Lu Feng's senior, so under Lu Feng's insistence, they naturally went along with Lu Feng. After all, they still had to give face to senior Lu Feng. Now, there was less than half a month before the final examination. During this time, they could afford to wait. During this half a month, Su Wenchao naturally continued his life as an otaku who skipped class. And Mu Xuyan also skipped class. Of course, she didn't skip class to go out and play. She was always by Lu Feng's side. At this moment, Lu Feng's identity had already been spread. All the disciples looked at Lu Feng with a kind of reverence and a kind of humility. After all, Lu Feng's identity was simply the most honorable in the Federation. Moreover, in addition to this identity, Lu Feng's strength was also respected by everyone. He was the 8th emperor of the younger generation in the Federation. Although this emperor had not yet been recognized in the Federal University of the Cymbidium, he had already been thoroughly recognized. For more than 10 days, Lu Feng had been in class almost all the time. He looked completely like a good student. Of course, in Su Wenchao's eyes, he was completely disdainful. After all, although eldest young Master Su skipped class every day, he was still in school. Moreover, he didn't miss any of the Psyche master classes. However, eldest young Master Lu had only been in class for a few days. Therefore, compared to Lu Feng, eldest young Master Su felt that he was more of a good student. This was a science and technology war class, which was a class for ordinary students. After all, only a very small number of people in this world were able to cultivate. Most of them were ordinary people. Furthermore, humans couldn't rely on just one or two powerhouses to sustain themselves. If a race wanted to develop in the long run, they still had to rely on ordinary people. Therefore, this science and technology war class was a very important class for ordinary people. However, most of the people who attended such classes were ordinary people or psychic masters with poor psychic mastery talent. After all, they didn't have a choice in the future. If they wanted to stand out, the only choice they had was to rely on technological weapons to fight. Lu Fenglai's presence naturally attracted a lot of attention. However, they couldn't control Lu Feng, nor did they dare control Lu Feng. In many people's minds, Lu Feng was just there to experience life. Of course, they didn't know what Lu Feng was thinking. Back then, Lu Feng had chosen to be a mechanical psyche master. After all, Lu Feng liked those mecha battleships. However, the subsequent development had already exceeded his expectations. The speed of his strength improvement could be said to be incredible. Only a year had passed, but his strength had undergone an earth-shattering change compared to back then. In the past, it was already quite difficult for him to fight against evolved warriors. However, now that he had fully unleashed his combat power, he might even be able to suppress a mid-stage perfect-grade warrior. The limit of a mechanical psyche master's power was the perfect-grade warrior level. Therefore, a mechanical psyche master couldn't help him much. However, Lu Feng's childhood dream of mecha hadn't been shattered. Therefore, when he had time, he still chose to come here and listen to these classes. The days passed by in the midst of these dawdling. Soon, the final end-of-term examination arrived. This was the first year's end-of-term examination, and many people were unusually cautious. Of course, among the many people, Lu Feng and the other 10 people who had been specially recruited by the General Hospital were not included. Lu Feng also participated in the final examination, and his results were passable. For this, it could be considered a perfect end to the first year. Chapter 256. Interstellar Route on a Spaceship. Lu Feng quietly leaned back in his seat, looking at the boundless starry sky outside. There was a special kind of tranquility in his heart. Beside him, Su Wenchao was even quieter. Because he fell asleep again, Lu Feng, I've already informed my family. This time, you'll be a guest in our Tianyun galaxy. We'll definitely make sure you come back satisfied. Mu Shuiyan beside him could no longer hide her excitement. They had already left the Symbidium for more than a day. Now, they were only a few hours away from the Tianyun galaxy. Along the way, Mu Shuiyan introduced Lu Feng to a lot of the sights of the Tianyun galaxy. This also made Lu Feng a little interested in the Tianyun galaxy. Finally, after another 2 hours, they arrived at Planet Kuan in the Tianyun galaxy. Planet Kuan is a first-grade life planet. It belongs to the 2 first-grade life planets of the Tianyun galaxy. It is one of the 3 first-grade life planets controlled by the Mu family. The people living on this life planet are all members of the Mu family. However, they are not part of the main branch but the side branches. Mu Shuiyan is a child of the side branch. However, because of her amazing talent and outstanding appearance, she is almost the most outstanding among the side branch children. Even many of the main branch children are far inferior to her. Naturally, Mu Shuiyan's return can be considered to have caused a small stir among the side branches. After all, this time, Mu Shuiyan was specially recruited by the Federal University General Hospital. As soon as they got off the spaceship, they saw countless people. This degree of prosperity made Lu Feng sigh slightly. How is it, Lu Feng? Isn't Planet Kuan very prosperous? Mu Shuiyan said with a proud look on her face. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng also nodded slightly. Although it can't be compared to Gufang Planet or the Capital Administrative Planet, the degree of prosperity here is already very high. However, after thinking about it for a while, Lu Feng felt relieved. He had already heard about it from Mu Shuiyan. The most famous thing about the Skycloud Galaxy was its strange, natural scenery. It attracted a lot of tourists all year round. As for Kuan Star, it was known as the Holy Land of the Federation's tourism. The number of tourists there was never cut off all year round. Therefore, it was normal for this planet to be more prosperous than a normal Level 1 life planet. Lu Feng, come home with me first. Our Star Kuan scenery would take at least a year to get a rough look at it. So for the time being, you can stay in my house. Since he was already here, Lu Feng naturally didn't have so many scruples. He smiled and nodded. Then, he threw the heavy luggage behind him, causing Su Wenchao, who had just come down, to almost fall. Looking at the heavy luggage, Su Wenchao's face darkened. He looked up at Mu Shuiyan with hatred, but all he got was the back of her beautiful head. This was because Mu Shuiyan had already pulled Lu Feng forward. When he saw this, Su Wenchao could only sigh helplessly. He carried Mu Shuiyan's huge luggage and chased after the two of them. It had to be said that a life planet was indeed not something a level 3 life form like the Cymbidium could compare to. This was not only reflected in the degree of prosperity of this place, but also in the behavior of the ordinary people. Here, even an ordinary hover car driver would be unusually polite. This kind of quality was worthy of the Federation's name as a tourist attraction. Su Wenchao, put my things away properly. Those are my personal belongings. You have to be careful if you break them. Mu Shuiyan finally lost her temper when she saw Su Wenchao throw Mu Shuiyan's belongings into the trunk. When he heard this, Su Wenchao muttered a few words in a low voice. However, he still obediently rearranged her belongings. Are the three of you here for a vacation? Lu Feng and the other two weren't very old. Although Lu Feng had experienced a lot of things and had a kind of maturity that young people didn't have. However, with just a glance, the feeling of immaturity couldn't be hidden. This hover car driver had been in this line of work for more than 10 years, so he could naturally tell at a glance. Hearing his words, before Lu Feng could speak, Mu Shuiyan spoke first. Kind of. I'm from Planet Kuan. These two are my classmates. They're here for a vacation. When he heard that Mu Shuiyan was a local resident of Planet Kuan, the driver was obviously interested. After all, although Planet Kuan was a branch of the Mu family, nearly 99% of the people here were not locals. Most of them came from all over the Federation. They were all here for tourism or business. Obviously, Mu Shuiyan also had a good impression of this talkative driver. Little girl, are you going to bring your boyfriend home? Through the stereoscopic projection, the driver clearly saw Mu Shuiyan's body leaning close to Lu Feng's body. Every time Mu Shuiyan spoke, her eyes would intentionally or unintentionally glance at Lu Feng. This scene, for the hover car driver who had been watching people for a long time, was naturally very clear. Hearing this, Mu Shuiyan showed a shy smile. She glanced at Lu Feng and found that Lu Feng seemed to be in a daze at this moment, so she secretly nodded. Seeing this scene, the driver also smiled knowingly. He said, "Little girl, you and your boyfriend are really a match made in heaven. It seems that you're not ordinary people." Mu Shuiyan's appearance naturally didn't need to be said. She was beautiful. Although she couldn't become the top in the Federation yet, she was still young after all. After working at the Spacecraft Center for so many years, this was the first time the driver had seen such a beautiful girl. As for Lu Feng, he had the bloodline of deicide Lu Tao and Yen Qinwei. Both of them were handsome and beautiful, so naturally, Lu Feng wouldn't be too bad either. Moreover, Lu Feng had a kind of otherworldly and dignified will. Therefore, the driver was sure that these two were not ordinary people. Hearing this, Mu Shuiyan felt that this driver was very kind. She nodded fiercely and replied, "I'm just average. But my boyfriend. Looking at Lu Feng, she found that he was still frowning slightly. Mu Xuyan secretly sighed in relief and said, "My boyfriend is really very outstanding. He's the most outstanding in the entire Federation." Yan Chunwei wasn't talking nonsense. After all, Lu Feng's bloodline was there, and she already knew that Lu Feng was now an emperor, a supreme youth. With such a status, among the younger generation of this era, only the supreme emperors, who were a few years older than Lu Feng, could compare to him. Therefore, Lu Feng was one of the 8 most outstanding people of the younger generation. However, in the driver's ears, this became a kind of praise. After all, beauty was in the eye of the beholder. In the eyes of any lover, her other half was the most outstanding. By the way, I haven't asked you where you're going. We're already out of the spacecraft center. We should choose a path. Hearing this, Mu Xuyan slightly stuck out her tongue. She only cared about looking at Lu Feng and chatting with the driver. She hadn't said her destination yet. However, this was understandable. This was because every time she returned, there would be people from her family waiting here to welcome her. All she had to do was get in the car. However, this time, because of Lu Feng, she chose to take the car with the 3 of them. "Please send us to the Mu family's villa." Hearing this, the driver was slightly taken aback. However, after a moment, his expression changed slightly. He carefully asked, "Is it the Mu family's villa in the center of Kunming City?" Mu Xuyan nodded gently. She knew that once this name was mentioned, the people of Kunming City would definitely know about it. Seeing Mu Xuyan's affirmative answer, the driver slightly sucked in a breath of cold air. Mu family's villa. Although the name wasn't extraordinary, all the residents of Kunming City knew what kind of place the Mu family's villa was. It was the place where the most distinguished people of the Mu family's branch lived. Although it was a branch of the Mu family, in the eyes of ordinary people, it was a heavenly existence. As the residence of the most distinguished people of the branch, the Mu family's villa was naturally the most important place in the hearts of every citizen of Kunming City. "Then, miss, are you from the Mu family?" At this moment, the way he addressed her had changed. He naturally knew the terrifying influence of the Mu family. Therefore, he didn't speak so casually now. Mu Xuyan nodded gently again, but there wasn't any arrogance in her expression. Although in the eyes of ordinary people, the Mu family's villa where the distinguished people of the Mu family lived was a real place of nobility, in the eyes of those who truly stood at the peak, not to mention the Mu family's branch, even the main branch of the Mu family was nothing. Previously, the Song family's ranking among the first-rate families in the Federation was much higher than the Mu family. However, facing the man beside her, after the Song family's god descended, he did nothing. He even directly overstepped his authority and abolished the Song family's successor. This undoubtedly made people understand the terror of the human king and Lu family even more clearly. Mu Xuyan understood that if they were to talk about identity, then Lu Feng, who had the dual identity of the human king's direct bloodline and Dao Songtian's disciple, was undoubtedly the #1 person in the younger generation. He was the human race, the pinnacle race, the current #1 prince. After a slight silence, the driver didn't know what to say. After all, he was just an ordinary driver. Facing this Kuan star, who was the true ruler of the Mu family on the surface and in the dark, he already felt nervous. However, when he saw Mu Xuyan's affectionate expression, he thought of another way. For him, meeting a descendant of the Mu family was undoubtedly a great opportunity. If he could grasp it, then it wouldn't be a problem for him to have a meteoric rise in the future. Therefore, from the moment he found out about Mu Xuyan's identity, the driver didn't ask anything else. He just kept talking about how compatible Mu Xuyan and Lu Feng were and how suitable they were. Although Mu Xuyan already understood the driver's thoughts, she couldn't help but feel elated when she heard this. Her interest was completely piqued. When he saw Mu Xuyen and the driver talking about such irrelevant things, Su Wenchao only curled his lips slightly. Then, he slowly leaned against the back seat and entered the world of the Sky Network. Of course, Lu Feng still looked like he was in a trance. However, he was truly in a trance. This was because Lu Feng felt it. Lu Feng felt it when he came out of the spaceship's center. He felt that there was something strange about this Kuan star. There seemed to be a sense of complete chaos here. Of course, this chaos wasn't the chaos of the living environment, but the chaos of the order of heaven and earth. According to what Lu Feng knew, in such a chaotic world, even creatures with extremely strong vitality couldn't exist, let alone humans. After all, this chaos was a derivation of the laws. However, there was nothing there. In fact, it was a very peaceful life. This was a little strange. Chapter 257. Although the Mu family branch is powerful enough to suppress the entire planet, this chaos originates from the laws. Under such a will, even the gods would be infected. But why is it that the people here don't seem to be affected at all? Lu Feng didn't understand and didn't understand. Of course, this wasn't the main reason why Lu Feng was completely lost in thought. The main reason why he couldn't sense what was going on around him was because of a calling. It was a calling that came from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't strong, but it was intermittent and had always been there. What on earth is calling out to me? I can feel that the source of this calling doesn't seem to have anything to do with me. It's just calling out to me. Lu Feng knew that no one else would be able to sense this call, because only those who had entered the Tao could feel it. Of course, if it weren't for his identity as a person who had entered the Tao, Lu Feng wouldn't have been able to sense the chaotic will of this Kuan star. It seems that this time's arrival is really interesting. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Originally, Lu Fenglai had only come here because of Mu Xuyen's invitation and because he really wanted to relax. However, after arriving, Lu Feng realized that everything was not as he had imagined. This place was really interesting. By the time Lu Feng came back to his senses, the car had already stopped. The place where they stopped was right in front of the main entrance of the Mu family's villa. The Mu family's villa was called a villa. However, its vastness was even more terrifying than a huge villa complex. If this place was surrounded by a city, then Lu Feng believed that the Mu family's villa could be called the Mu family's city. Looking at the towering main entrance in front of him, Lu Feng nodded gently. This main entrance was several times bigger than the main entrance of the Cymbidium Federal University. It was imposing, dignified, and there was even a faint sense of a powerful will flowing through it. Above the main entrance, the words Mu Clan's Courtyard were hung high above. Between the words, there was a kind of terrifying majesty that was spreading. Lu Feng knew that the person who wrote the words Mu Clan Courtyard must be a truly terrifying expert. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left such a terrifying will in his words. How is it? Our Mu Clan isn't bad, right? Originally, Su Wenchao was instructed to move the things down, but the driver volunteered to bear everything. With Su Wenchao's lazy personality, he naturally didn't know what politeness was. Therefore, the one who actually carried the luggage was the chauffeur. Not bad at all. By the way, Shuiyan, who wrote the 4 words on your clothes? Lu Feng pointed at the words Mu Clan's Courtyard, that contained a wondrous will. Upon hearing this, Mu Xuyen revealed a strange expression. Lu Feng, did you feel something? Hearing this, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. He didn't know how Mu Xuyen found out. However, he still nodded gently. Seeing Lu Feng admit it, Mu Xuyen's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Did you know, Lu Feng? The person who wrote these words was an ancestor of our Mu clan. His level back then was the limit of a true god. After writing these words, he once said, "I have no regrets in my life." He spoke frankly. These were the 4 words that he merged with unmatched profound mysteries. Although it has no practical use, being able to write it is already proof of a kind of realm. However, it's a pity that all of our Mu clan's ancestors who can see that there is something wrong with these words are all god level. Among the younger generation, only a peerless genius from 1,200 years ago was able to see it, and now, he has already become a legendary figure in the Mu clan. At that time, he also felt the difference in these words when he was in the realm of a perfect stage martial artist. However, you actually felt it at such a realm. As expected of the 8th emperor of the younger generation. Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't think much of it. To be able to see the mystery contained in these 4 words, this really wasn't much. Lu Feng believed that many of the younger generation in the massacre abyss could easily feel it. Even those gods of massacre should be able to feel it easily. Therefore, this really wasn't much. Hearing Mu Xuyan's explanation, Lu Feng also understood. The person who wrote these 4 words was indeed a powerhouse. Of course, the limit of a true god was nothing much. However, to be able to write these 4 words, although it was by chance, it also showed that he was extraordinary. After all, what was involved here was the laws. Alright, let's go in. Don't stand at the door in a daze. Mu Xuyan didn't seem to be interested in these things. She pulled Lu Feng, wanting to go in directly. Originally, Lu Feng wanted to stay and watch, but he couldn't persuade Mu Xuyan. He could only smile helplessly and go in with her. Soon, the 4 of them walked into the vast cluster of villa buildings. In the Mu family's courtyard, it was obviously relatively quiet. After all, there were much fewer people living here compared to outside. Even if all the people from the Mu family came out at this moment, it probably wouldn't be that lively. It was the driver's first time entering such a place. After walking a few steps, he was already sweating profusely. Lu Feng also knew that if it was just Mu Xuyan's luggage, such a situation wouldn't happen at all. It was caused by the nervousness in his heart. Thinking of this, Lu Feng stopped and walked to the driver's side. He directly took the luggage with one hand. Lu Feng himself was a martial artist at the peak of the evolution stage. His physical strength was only a little bit away from breaking through the standard of 10,000 stars. And this driver was just an ordinary person. Although he was slightly stronger than others, his physical strength was probably around 0.05 stars. At best, it wouldn't reach 0.1 stars. Under Lu Feng's strength, how could he resist? So, before he reacted, the luggage had already reached Lu Feng's shoulder. Seeing this scene, the driver was obviously sluggish for a while. After a while, there was a slight panic in his face. Although he didn't know the identity of Lu Feng, just looking at the inexplicable temperament was enough to let people understand that Lu Feng was not an ordinary person. In addition, he could clearly see that this child of the Mu family obviously liked this young man, and even brought him to the Mu family. Even if this young man didn't have any identity, once he had a relationship with the Mu family, he would definitely have a meteoric rise. How could he dare to let Lu Feng hold it for him? This student, it's not necessary. It's different. I can do it myself. You can put it down. Seeing this anxious expression, people who didn't know would think that Lu Feng robbed a millionaire from him. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng smiled slightly and said, "It's okay, I'll just hold it. This thing is nothing to me." But the driver didn't seem to hear Lu Feng's words. He even wanted to directly snatch it from Lu Feng's hands. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng could only let go of his hand. After receiving the luggage, the driver actually had a grateful look on his face. With a slight sigh, Lu Feng knew that this was an ordinary person. Their living level had already determined their status. Not looking at anything, he shook his head gently at Mu Xuyan, who turned around with a puzzled face, then walked directly inside. To be honest, the entire Mu family's courtyard was too big. If he walked by himself, He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to finish it in a few hours. But fortunately, there were suspension cars at the entrance of the Mu family's courtyard. No matter who it was, they could use them. Looking at these suspension cars, Lu Feng was also speechless for a while. Because these suspension cars were only used for transportation, they were all the top series of suspension cars, and they were all the same type. Lu Feng, who had a certain understanding of suspension cars, naturally knew the price of this kind of suspension car. Looking at Mu Shiyan next to him, Lu Feng showed a smile. Shiyan, your Mu family is really rich. The price of this kind of suspension car is above 5 million Federation coins. Unless you're really rich, no one can afford it. I didn't expect that here. It's only a means of transportation. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Mu Shiyan smiled slightly. This is nothing. In the main branch of the Mu family, there are no suspension cars, but there are tunnels and stairs. That thing is many times more expensive than these suspension cars. By the way, Lu Feng, doesn't your family have such a thing? As the number one existence among all the aristocratic families in the human race, as the number one aristocratic family in the world, although these things were expensive, it was really nothing to them. But listening to Lu Feng's tone, it seemed that he had never seen it before. This surprised Mu Shiyan. When I was in the Lu family, that was when I was very young, and some time ago I returned to the Lu family. It's just that the place I lived in didn't have these things at all, and I couldn't even feel the slightest trace of technology. There are only a few ancient buildings left. Hearing this, Mu Shiyan nodded with confusion. But she didn't continue to ask, because they had already arrived at their destination. Looking at the 7-story villa in front of them, the driver was shocked. At this moment, his legs were really weak. As a resident of Kunming City, he had a little understanding of the Mu family's courtyard. And this understanding was about the difference in status in the Mu family's courtyard. In the Mu family's courtyard, the ordinary children could only live in 2-story villas at most. And the higher the status, the higher the floor they lived in. In the Mu family's courtyard, the highest floor he knew was the 8-story villa. Only the young family head of the strongest branch of the Mu family had the qualifications to live in that villa. And there was only one 8-story villa like this in the entire Mu family's courtyard. In addition to the 8-story villa, the 7-story villa represented the existence of the highest status in the branch of the Mu family. The driver didn't expect that the outrageously beautiful girl he casually met was actually someone from the branch of the Mu family. Such an identity was undoubtedly as noble as a princess to an ordinary person. After getting out of the car, dozens of young people dressed in aristocratic clothes walked out of the villa. They were led by an old man to the front of the suspension car. Before Lu Feng could do anything, one of them had already opened the car door. Lu Feng could feel that when the housekeeper saw Mu Shiyan, there was a touch of doting and excitement in his eyes. "Miss, you're back." Seeing the housekeeper, Mu Shiyan was also a little excited. She got out of the car and directly threw herself on the housekeeper. "Uncle Wang, Shiyan missed you so much." Uncle Wang smiled and patted Mu Shiyan, who was hanging on his body. He said, "Miss, Uncle Wang also missed you. Okay, come down quickly. Otherwise, your friend will laugh at you." At this moment, Mu Shiyan seemed to have just remembered that Lu Feng was beside her. After a soft cry, she suddenly retreated. But there was still a slight blush on her face. Seeing his miss blushing and looking at the man beside her, Uncle Wang's eyes flashed. But after a moment, he showed a trace of doubt. Mu Shiyan's behavior was already very obvious. Naturally, he could see it. However, this was not something that he could decide. Of course, he could not decide on this matter. He still wanted to see what the person Mu Shiyan chose was like. But with a glance, he could not see anything. In fact, in his perception, Lu Feng did not have the slightest bit of strength. This feeling should not be, absolutely not. One must know that he was now a warrior at the peak of the upheaval stage. With this kind of strength, he could be considered a powerhouse in the Federation. Moreover, he naturally knew what kind of person Mu Shuiyan was. She was fully deserving of the title of young miss and little princess of the Mu family. Even in the younger generation of the Mu family, she was one of the top few people. Her qualifications and talent were very tempting to the main bloodline. Therefore, this also caused Mu Shuiyan's pride. It was a kind of pride that was born naturally. How could such a proud person like her fancy an ordinary person? Therefore, this should not be, absolutely not. Therefore, at this moment, Lu Feng had become incomparably mysterious in Uncle Wang's eyes. Chapter 258. May I know your name, young master? Uncle Wang asked respectfully. Lu Feng smiled warmly, without the arrogance of a young master from an aristocratic family. My name is Lu Feng. Uncle Wang, you can just call me by my name. Surname Lu? Uncle Wang frowned slightly. He was trying to think of a family with the surname Lu in the Federation. Unfortunately, after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out Lu Feng's identity. This was because such a mysterious person couldn't be nurtured by a third-rate aristocratic family. However, there were still a few families with the surname Lu among the second-rate and first-rate aristocratic families. In order to confirm which Lu family it was, Uncle Wang asked again. May I know where young Master Lu is from? At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood Uncle Wang's plan. However, he didn't intend to reveal his identity. Of course, Lu Feng wouldn't deliberately deceive anyone. Cymbidium. Cymbidium? Uncle Wang might not have known where the Cymbidium was in the past, but things were different now. After Mu Shuiyan's trip, they understood the Cymbidium. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he still couldn't think of a powerful family with the surname Lu in the Cymbidium. Lu Feng simply shrugged when he saw Duanmu Huanghun pondering in silence. Indeed, there weren't any families with the surname Lu in the Cymbidium. However, he wasn't really a resident of the Cymbidium. When Mu Shuiyan heard Lu Feng's answer, she knew that Lu Feng didn't want to reveal his identity. Therefore, she just went along with it. Okay, Uncle Wang, Lu Feng is my classmate. This time, we all passed the special admissions assessment, so we specially invited him to our house to play. Uncle Wang's eyes lit up when he heard this. Passing the special enrollment examination of the main school, this was very terrifying. After all, the Federal University only had a few hundred special admissions slots every year. The number seemed terrifying, but if one thought about it, there were more than 100 first-rate families in the entire Federation. Therefore, if these hundreds of specially recruited quotas were divided equally, it really wasn't much. To think that young Master Lu has hidden his strength so well. To be able to obtain a special quota from the headquarters, one can be considered a genius of the Federation level in the entire human race. Although Lu Feng didn't say anything, Uncle Wang was even more certain that Lu Feng had a great identity. The fact that he could be specially recruited already proved his strength. Upon hearing Mu Shuiyan's words, Uncle Wang seemed to have realized that he had lost his composure. He quickly turned around and led Lu Feng and the other two directly into the villa. Luxurious, I say, Miss Mu, you guys really know how to enjoy life. Although our Su family is considered a relatively wealthy family, compared to your family, we're really far behind. The Su family was a second-rate family, but it was at the peak of the second-rate family. Rumor had it that they were waiting for an opportunity. As long as the opportunity came, the Su family would become a newly promoted first-rate family. Moreover, in the eyes of many, the Su family was already a first-rate family. The Mu clan was also aware of this. Therefore, after learning about Su Wenchao's identity, Uncle Wang was obviously much more enthusiastic. Young Master Su, Although our Mu family can't compare to the Beiyu and Song families at the peak of the first-rate families, we're still considered one of the top families. Moreover, our Mu family has been around for almost 4,000 years. It's only right for us to have some accumulation. On the other hand, young Master Su's Su family has improved significantly these years. I'm afraid it won't be long before they become a first-rate family. When that time comes, they'll receive a lot more resources. It won't be long before the Su family has such treatment too. The Mu family had been around for 4,000 years and had a strong accumulation. In addition, the Koan planet controlled by the Mu family branch was a famous tourist planet in the entire Federation. Therefore, in terms of wealth, they were much more than many first-rate families. It was because of these reasons that the Mu family could enjoy such luxurious treatment. Looking at the vast space in front of him, looking at the beautiful carvings, and feeling the combination of modern technology and classical architecture, Lu Feng was also relaxed and happy. However, it was only a little comfortable. As for other things, Lu Feng didn't feel much. After all, in his eyes, only cultivation was the right path. These kinds of enjoyment were enough for him to come in contact with occasionally. Looking at Lu Feng, who also seemed to be enjoying himself, Uncle Wang asked again, "Young Master Lu, how does this place compare to your house?" Lu Feng knew that Uncle Wang still wanted to know his identity. Naturally, with Lu Feng's current status, it was impossible for him to lie. He answered directly, "It's much more comfortable. My house is just an ordinary villa. Although it cost a lot to build, it's not even a little bit worse than this place." Lu Feng did not lie about this. His villa in the Cymbidium was indeed like this. "Young Master Lu, where do your parents work?" Before Lu Feng could answer, Mu Shuyan spoke first. Uncle Wang, don't ask any more. Lu Feng's parents are now in the upper management of BUCC Company. Other than that, there's really nothing else." Mu Shuyan obviously felt Uncle Wang's unwillingness to give up. Afraid that it would cause Lu Feng to be disgusted, Mu Shuyan directly said it. Her meaning was obvious. She didn't want Uncle Wang to continue asking. Uncle Wang understood Mu Shuyan's meaning and sighed helplessly. After saying a few words in a low voice, he left to prepare lunch. The three people present were not ordinary people. Although they were psychics, their bodies were stronger than ordinary people. So naturally, the three of them heard Uncle Wang's low voice. Lu Feng and Mu Shuyan looked embarrassed, but Su Wenchao still had a wretched look on his face. His eyes kept rolling, as if he had thought of something, and he actually laughed strangely. Seeing this, Miss Mu was furious. She had already suppressed Su Wenchao when they were in the Cymbidium. Now that they were in her own family, how could Su Wenchao be so rebellious? She wanted to teach Su Wenchao a lesson, but seeing that Lu Feng was still beside her, Mu Shuyan forced herself to suppress her anger. She just glared at Su Wenchao. Su Wenchao seemed to understand that Miss Mu wanted to maintain her ladylike image in front of Lu Feng. Therefore, he decisively stood by Lu Feng's side, looking like he would never leave Lu Feng in the face of death. It took almost half an hour to show Lu Feng around the huge villa. At this time, Uncle Wang's voice was heard. "Miss, lunch is ready. Come down and eat with your friends." Hearing this, Su Wenchao rushed out in a single step. From the looks of it, he was definitely a warrior. Lu Feng shrugged helplessly. His face darkened. Su Wenchao's behavior made him feel embarrassed. "Miss, the master and madam went to the main planet to attend a meeting. It seems to have something to do with you, so they might not be back today. But the master told me to take good care of your friends. When they come back, he will personally receive them." Hearing this, Lu Feng did not care. Su Wenchao was fine as long as there was good food. Naturally, he did not mind. However, Mu Shuyan looked thoughtful. "Uncle Wang, what's the matter?" Hearing that it was about her, Mu Shuyan vaguely remembered something. After all, she was of age now. Uncle Wang saw Mu Shuyan's expression and knew that she remembered. He smiled and said, "I heard the master mention it. It seems to be about your coming-of-age ceremony." As expected, whether it was the Mu family or other aristocratic families, generally, children were considered adults when they turned 18. At this time, the family would hold a ceremony as a coming-of-age ceremony. However, not all disciples of aristocratic families were able to enjoy such treatment. Only those disciples with true potential were qualified to receive such treatment. This time, the main branch had invited Mu Shuiyan's parents to discuss her coming-of-age ceremony. Obviously, they had already regarded Mu Shuiyan as a core disciple. For the people of the main branch, this was a supreme honor. However, Mu Shuiyan did not care about this. Perhaps in the past, she would be proud of becoming a core disciple of the main branch. However, after meeting Lu Feng, she understood everything. What kind of honor was this? Their so-called glory was nothing but a laughable decoration in the eyes of the truly honorable existences. Lu Feng's identity was so honorable and domineering. However, he had never really cared about these things. Compared to those geniuses, Mu Shuiyan was the only one among all the students who knew how terrifying Lu Feng was. 9 months ago, Lu Feng was just an ordinary genius. Even compared to her, he was quite a bit weaker. At that time, he had narrowly escaped death and finally managed to fight against a martial artist of the lowest level, the most ordinary martial artist. However, when he returned 9 months later, he faced a martial artist of the upheaval stage and sent him flying with a casual slap. Compared to his strength 9 months ago, he was like a completely different person. From Lu Feng, Mu Shuiyan saw the attitude that a true genius should have. Only by constantly surpassing and breaking through. Existences like them didn't need any ceremony to acknowledge anything. This was because they themselves were synonymous with glory. Although Mu Shuiyan was not as good as Lu Feng, she had been influenced by Lu Feng and was already very indifferent to these things. Originally, Uncle Wang had hoped to see a pleasantly surprised expression on Mrs. face after saying these words. But from beginning to end, Mu Shuiyan's face remained indifferent. This was not a pretense. It was really like this. Uncle Wang did not understand. He naturally knew what kind of glory this represented. Being recognized by the main branch was also what Mu Shuiyan had once pursued. However, Mu Shuiyan's attitude now really puzzled him. Chapter 259. Oh, is that so? Then we'll talk about it when my parents come back. Plain, it was too plain. At this moment, Uncle Wang felt a little strange. He really didn't understand why Mu Shuiyan had such an attitude. But since the young miss didn't mind, he didn't say anything. The lunch was very luxurious. According to Su Wenchao, this was much better than the more luxurious banquets in the garden. Lu Feng also knew about the price of the garden. Generally, the most ordinary banquets cost at least 100,000 Federation coins. As for the luxurious banquets, they cost at least 300,000 coins. In other words, this lunch cost at least 300,000 Federation coins. This number was truly a little shocking. Of course, this was a first-class family in the Federation, so it was nothing to eat here. It could be seen from Mu Shuiyan's calm expression. After the meal, Lu Feng originally wanted to think about some things by himself, but he couldn't resist Mu Shuiyan's enthusiasm and was forcefully dragged out. As for Su Wenchao, Mu Shuiyan naturally didn't want to have such a big third wheel by her side. So when he expressed that he didn't want to go out, Mu Shuiyan didn't even ask, making Su Wenchao roll his eyes. Soon, Lu Feng and Mu Shuiyan left. At this moment, Uncle Wang came to Su Wenchao's room. Looking at Su Wenchao's lazy expression, Uncle Wang couldn't connect him with the young master of the Su family. But since it was Mu Shuiyan who said it, it must be true, so Uncle Wang naturally didn't suspect anything. Young Master Su, the family head has instructed. If you need anything in the Mu family, you can ask. After leaving Lu Feng and Mu Shuyan, Su Wenchao was naturally unrestrained. And at this moment, the aura of a young master of the Su family was finally revealed. If there's anything I need, I'll ask you. Su Wenchao never knew what being polite was. Hearing this, Uncle Wang bowed respectfully. Even though Su Wenchao was only the young master of a second-rate family, he was still very powerful. However, many people knew that it was inevitable that the Su family would become a first-rate family in the Federation. It wouldn't be long before the Su family became a new first-rate family. At that time, Su Wenchao's status would be indescribably noble. He was equivalent to the young master of the main bloodline. This kind of status was obviously much nobler than the branch lineage. Su Wenchao's eyes flashed as he looked at Uncle Wang, who was hesitating but unwilling to leave. What? Is there anything else? Uncle Wang hesitated slightly as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he finally raised his head and carefully looked at the extremely weak existence in front of him. Young Master Su, I don't want to beat around the bush. Actually, I would like to ask, what is the identity of your classmate? Hearing this, Su Wenchao did not have any strange expression. However, his aura suddenly rose at this moment. This was not the aura of a powerhouse, but a noble aura that came from the depths of one's bloodline. The Su family that Su Wenchao belonged to was an aristocratic family. He, Su Wenchao, had the bloodline of a god. Nobility. The nobility of a god's descendant came from the bloodline inheritance. Uncle Wang was not afraid of this nobility. After all, the difference between the two was simply too big. However, he still felt a kind of terrifying oppression. At this moment, Uncle Wang's heart was in a state of shock. He finally understood why the Su family had been given the rights of a first-rate family by the aristocratic family alliance, even though they had not become a first-rate family yet. It turned out that all this was not because of some secret deal, but because the Su family had the qualifications to do so. Their bloodline inheritance was actually so terrifying and so noble. This kind of power was not something that an ordinary supreme divine body could inherit. This, at the very least, had reached the legendary truth holy physique. The descendants of a supreme divine body would become a second-rate family in the future. No matter how powerful the family was, they would never be able to become a first-rate family. At most, they would become a first-rate family. After all, to become a first-rate family, the nobility of one's bloodline was the most important condition. Above the supreme divine body was the sacred truth body, which could only be inherited by a first-rate family. The most basic condition to condense the sacred truth body was to reach the level of the virtual king. In other words, there had been a virtual king among the ancestors of the Su family. This was really terrifying. Su Wenchao looked at Uncle Wang quietly. This kind of terrifying majesty continued to leak out, causing Uncle Wang's heart to tremble even more. He knew that the bloodline density of this young master of the Su family was absolutely terrifying. Otherwise, he would not have been able to make him feel so oppressed just by relying on the bloodline power of the sacred truth body. Finally, after a long period of oppression, Su Wenchao spoke. Is this what you want to ask, or is it what your family wants to ask? Or is it what the main branch of the Mu family wants to know? Uncle Wang did not hesitate and said directly, the family head and mistress do not know about this matter yet. I only want to know. His eyes were clear, and he did not hide anything. He believed that the inheritor of the bloodline of the sacred truth body would be able to distinguish the truth of his words. Sure enough, after looking at him for a while, Su Wenchao nodded his head gently. That is my brother. I just want to say that if you want to deal with him, then you will have to deal with the Su family. I now have the right to declare war on behalf of the Su family. When the last sentence was said, the majesty brought about by the limitless bloodline increased even more terrifyingly. Such majesty even made Uncle Wang feel a sense of threat. At this moment, the fear in Uncle Wang's heart grew even stronger. He looked at Su Wenchao, his lips trembling slightly. You actually have a sealed bloodline. A sealed bloodline was something that could only be obtained when one's bloodline density had reached an extremely frightening level and had been sealed during one's childhood. Normally, the sealed bloodline would be released when one's body reached a certain level at around the age of 10. However, Uncle Wang could sense that Su Wenchao's bloodline seal had not been completely unsealed yet. This meant that there was one thing that mattered. Su Wenbin's bloodline was really extremely dense and terrifying. Even though he was 18 years old, his body was still unable to withstand the impact of the bloodline being released. This kind of bloodline was absolutely shocking. At this moment, Uncle Wang no longer doubted it, because he understood that such a dense bloodline was probably a true treasure in the Su family. As long as he was willing, the Su family's patriarchs would appear and fight for him. One person was enough to represent an entire family. Young Master Su, don't worry. I have no ill intentions towards your brother. It's just that I watched the young mistress grow up. I just hope that her other half is someone who is worthy of her. When he heard this, Su Wenchao laughed. It was a strange kind of laugh. He looked at Uncle Wang and slowly stopped laughing. Then, Su Wenchao's voice was heard again. My brother is incomparably noble. If he really isn't worthy of her, then it's Mu Shuyan who isn't worthy of him. As for his identity, since he doesn't want to say it, I won't say it either. However, I can tell you that he really doesn't have any thoughts about a member of the Mu family. After saying this, Su Wenchao waved his hand, indicating that Uncle Wang could leave. After Uncle Wang bowed respectfully, he turned around and left. As he watched Uncle Wang's back disappear, Su Wenchao smiled faintly. However, it was a smile that contained too much emotion. Brother, oh brother! I didn't know that you had hidden yourself so deeply. Your potential is truly frightening. As expected of the son of the God Slayer. A family with 2 kings and a title of emperor. This kind of glory is probably greater than your father's. I really don't know how far you'll go in the future. Will you really be able to break the shackles of the Divine King for the past 500 years? He sighed deeply. Others didn't know about the Massacre Abyss, but he already knew. In the Massacre Abyss, there was a terrifying king in the human camp of the God Slayer. His surname was Su. However, this is also good. After all, you are my brother. With a brother like you, I can live comfortably in the future. After finishing his last sentence, Su Wenchao's gaze turned into that wretched expression again. It was as though the person who appeared previously wasn't him. For the entire afternoon, Lu Feng and Mu Shuyan didn't go too far. They only played in the nearby Kunming City for the entire afternoon. Kunming City was the central city of Kuan Planet and also the largest city. Until now, Lu Feng had already been to 4 Super Life Planet. Gufang Planet, the capital administrative planet, and the Massacre Abyss were the 2 Super Massacre Planet. To be honest, those Super Life planets were much more prosperous than Planet Kuan. The few cities that Lu Feng had been to were also more prosperous than Kunming City. However, compared to those cities, Lu Feng liked Kunming City more. This was because the ecological environment here was too good. Those cities were the most prosperous. However, here there were countless plants and a completely natural aura. For warriors and psychics, such an aura that was close to nature was what they liked and wanted. Lush greenery formed a forest and fragrant grass was everywhere. Even on the main roads, there were countless grass and plants as decorations. This was worthy of being a tourist attraction of Kuan Planet. The afternoon passed very quickly. Originally, Mu Shuyan wanted to bring Lu Feng to tour Kunming City's night scenery. However, Lu Feng still refused. The reason was that he was a little tired. Of course, Mu Xuyan also knew that this was Lu Feng's excuse. After all, Lu Feng had the bloodline of the human king. His strength was unpredictable, and he was the new 8th king of the Federation. With his body, he definitely wouldn't feel tired. However, Mu Xuyan didn't say anything. This was because she had already seen that Lu Feng was absent-minded. From the moment he walked into Kunming City, Lu Feng seemed to be in a special state. He seemed to be thinking about something. Mu Xuyan, who understood this, didn't want to disturb Lu Feng. Therefore, the two of them quickly returned to the Mu family's residence. When he saw Lu Feng again, Uncle Wang's attitude was obviously more amiable. The conversation in the afternoon made him understand a little, although he still didn't know Lu Feng's identity. However, he also understood that Lu Feng's identity must be extremely noble. Otherwise, the young master of the Su family wouldn't have said so. Chapter 260. Of course, even without any status, just the fact that Lu Feng was Su Wenchao's brother was already incomparably honorable. After all, they were just a branch family. Young mistress, young master Lu, you're back. Seeing Uncle Wang's attitude, Lu Feng smiled and shook his head. Uncle Wang, you can just call me Lu Feng in the future. I'm really not used to being called young master Lu. Uncle Wang nodded in agreement, but he still changed the way he addressed Lu Feng. Lu Feng knew that this was the strict hierarchy of large families. Since it was like this, there was nothing he could say. After dinner, Lu Feng returned to his room. Mu Xuyan was also tired. After all, although her body was stronger than ordinary people, she was still a psychic. Therefore, she was really tired. After tidying everything up, Uncle Wang went directly to a special room. After hesitating for a moment, Uncle Wang opened the Sky Network and contacted someone. Soon, there was a response from the Sky Network. At this moment, a three-dimensional projection of a figure appeared in the void. Uncle Wang bowed respectfully when he saw the figure and said, "Greetings, Master." This person was the master of the branch family of the Mu family. He was also Mu Xuyan's father, Mu Tian. "How is it? Is young mistress back?" Uncle Wang lowered his head respectfully and replied, "Yes, master. Young mistress is back." Hearing this, Mu Tian nodded lightly. However, at this moment, he saw the hesitant Uncle Wang. In the end, he smiled gently and said, "Uncle Wang, you've been in the Mu family for hundreds of years. You watched my father grow up, so you can say whatever you want to say to me." Uncle Wang hesitated for a moment and said, "Master, the two classmates that young mistress brought back this time are not simple." "Not simple?" Mu Tian raised his eyebrows slightly. He only knew that Mu Xuyan was bringing two classmates home. Moreover, these two were psychics who were also specially recruited. In his opinion, Mu Xuyan wanted to establish her own clique. However, from Uncle Wang's words, it seemed that these two psychics were not simple people. Could it be that they are all people with great statuses? Uncle Wang nodded his head gently. "Yes, Patriarch. One of them is the young master of the Su family, Su Wenchao, who is currently in the limelight. The other one is surnamed Lu, but his identity has not been revealed. But according to what young Master Su said, he should also be a descendant of a big family, or even a powerful one." A glimmer of light appeared in Mu Tian's eyes when he heard this. It was a light that could be transmitted through the shadow. The young master of the Su family, Su Wenchao? Surnamed Lu, a psychic? Uncle Wang nodded his head gently. The Su family is the inheritor of the sacred truth body. The sacred truth body was different from the supreme divine body. Once the sacred truth body was condensed, the cultivator would have the same terrifying aptitude as a spiritual master or a martial artist. Once the cultivator chose to become a spiritual master and condensed the spiritual sea, the bloodline power would be completely converted into a spiritual bloodline, and the cultivator would have the same aptitude as a martial artist. However, as the inheritors of the sacred truth body, their family's accumulation of martial artists has reached a terrifying level. If the cultivator were to become a spiritual master, although his aptitude would not be any weaker, he would lose the help of the family's ancient books. The young master of the Su family is indeed extraordinary. Uncle Wang did not say anything when he heard this. He was well aware of all these things. The inheritors of the supreme divine body's bloodline could only cultivate the martial artist path. If they were to become a spiritual master, their bloodline would lose all its effects. It could be said that their bloodline was crippled. However, the sacred truth body was different. The sacred truth body was a terrifying body that only the virtual king could condense. The reason why the sacred truth body was called the sacred truth body was because the inheritor of this bloodline was an existence of truth. They could already ignore the barriers of spiritual masters and martial artists. Even if they were to change to the path of a spiritual master, their aptitude would not be affected at all. Once the spiritual sea was opened, the power of the bloodline would become a spiritual bloodline, and the support it gave would not be any weaker than that of a martial artist. It could be said that in the second-rate aristocratic families, everyone was a warrior. However, in the first-rate aristocratic families, there were already many spiritual masters. It's just the head of the family. The young master of the Su family doesn't seem to be that simple. He is in existence with a bloodline seal, and until now, his bloodline seal has not been removed. Shock! It was completely shocking. The Mu family, which had the bloodline of the divine descendants, naturally knew what a bloodline seal was. The bloodline of the divine descendants of the second-rate aristocratic families might be able to give birth to some inheritors of the bloodline seal. However, the probability of this happening is frighteningly low. As for the bloodline inheritor of the sacred truth body, it is almost impossible for one to appear. However, once one appears, it will be an existence that defies the natural order. As for the bloodline seal produced by the divine king's bloodline, it can be said to be unsolvable. He is destined to be a king. No one could deny this point. After all, the bloodline seal represented the extreme density of the bloodline. Although it was impossible to completely manifest the power of the ancestor's bloodline, it was already infinitely close. One had to know that any existence that could produce the bloodline of the divine descendants walked the path of the physical body. Their strongest point was the power of the bloodline. Once the descendant inherited the bloodline to an extremely high degree, then they would be able to possess the powerful power of the ancestor of the past. In the 8 divine king aristocratic families, one or several bloodline sealers had appeared before. Those bloodline sealers that were not erased, after growing up, became terrifying overlords of a region of the universe. Almost all of them were peerless ancestors that did not appear in the world. Any one of them was terrifying enough to be comparable to a life-and-death quasi-king. I didn't expect the young master of the Su family to be a bloodline sealer. This is too terrifying. Moreover, they actually let the young master of the Su family walk the path of a spiritual master. What a great scheme they have! Mu Tian sighed. If a peerless genius with a bloodline seal appeared in the Mu family, then they would definitely not let him walk the path of a spiritual master. It had to be said that the young master of the Su family was crazy, but the ancestors of the Su family were also crazy. The two of them were silent for a moment, but after a moment Mu Tian sighed deeply. The young master of the Su family would rather expose the secret of his bloodline seal to protect the identity of this Lu Feng. It seems that this matter is not simple. Uncle Wang nodded his head gently. Indeed, as long as Su Wenchao did not expose himself, even the virtual king patriarch would not be able to see the existence of his bloodline. However, he was willing to expose it for Lu Feng. There must be something shocking happening in this. Patriarch, this Lu Feng's surname is Lu. Could it be that he is an existence of that family? Mu Tian did not say anything and seemed to be deep in thought. After a long time, he finally nodded with difficulty. This Lu Feng is definitely a disciple of a large family. At the very least, he must be a first-rate or second-rate family. If he is able to cultivate as a spiritual master with a divine bloodline, then he must be a bloodline inheritor of the sacred truth body. Furthermore, the young master of the Su family is protecting him. Therefore, the family that Lu Feng belongs to must be above the Su family. The Su family is an aristocratic family that is about to enter the ranks of first-rate aristocratic families. There aren't many aristocratic families like this in the entire Federation. The only first-rate aristocratic family with the surname Lu that can overpower the Su family is probably that legendary family. Uncle Wang took a deep breath. When he heard Mu Tian's analysis, he seemed to have guessed Lu Feng's identity as well. Among the first-rate aristocratic families, there was no other family that fit this criteria. First-rate aristocratic family, the Lu family. There were a few families with the surname Lu in the Federation, but only two of them were truly memorable. They were the human monarch Lu family and the Lu family of the first-rate aristocratic families. These people didn't dare imagine the human monarch Lu family. It was the strongest family that the 6 great divine king aristocratic families and the alliance of hundreds of aristocratic families couldn't contend against. It was publicly recognized as the #1 aristocratic family in the universe. However, the human monarch Lu family's bloodline was extremely rare. The number of people in the main bloodline had never broken through the single digits in every generation. In this generation, there were only 4 people. These 4 people were all well-known existences of the human race, so they all knew them. Therefore, in their hearts, Lu Feng shouldn't be from the human monarch Lu family. Furthermore, they had never associated Lu Feng with the human monarch Lu family. After all, such an identity was really too honorable. What they thought of was the first-rate aristocratic family, the Lu family. The Lu family. They are publicly recognized as one of the top 3 aristocratic families among the first-rate aristocratic families. Furthermore, the Lu family is a branch of the human monarch Lu family. Although they don't possess the complete bloodline of the human monarch, just the slightest bloodline connection is enough to make them incomparably terrifying. The aristocratic family alliance includes almost all the first-rate aristocratic families and second-rate aristocratic families. However, only the Lu family isn't among them. However, the Lu family does indeed have the qualifications to do so. If they choose to join, then I'm afraid that the leading family of the aristocratic family alliance might not be the Beiyu family. At this moment, the two of them were already certain that Lu Feng was most likely a descendant of the Lu family. However, they still didn't dare confirm it. However, this is really a coincidence. Mu Tian suddenly let out a soft chuckle while the two of them were silent. Uncle Wang didn't ask anything, but his heart was filled with countless doubts. Uncle Wang, the patriarch of the main bloodline, has invited many true powerhouses and young geniuses for Shiyan's coming-of-age ceremony this time. Among these people, there are people from the human race and people from other races. Among them, there is a direct descendant of the Lu family. When the time comes, we will be able to ascertain whether Lu Feng is a descendant of the Lu family. Chapter 261. No one knew about the conversation between Uncle Wang and Mu Tian. Even if they knew, Lu Feng didn't care about it at all. For these people, their identity was the most important thing. However, to those true monstrous geniuses, these so-called family glories were just fleeting things. They didn't care about it at all. As a monstrous genius, true glory had to be obtained by oneself, relying on one's own strength to fight for it. The so-called glory given by the family was nothing to them. At this moment, Lu Feng was in the Sky Network. Of course, he was different from Su Wenchao. The former entered the Sky Network and wandered around. On the other hand, Lu Feng was looking for the information that he needed. After a long time, Lu Feng took down the Sky Network connector. He had a strange expression on his face. I didn't expect the name Kun to come about like this. As for me, actually, I should have thought about it. After all, the name Kun came about because of him. However, there shouldn't be any definite connection between the two. What is the purpose of all this? Lu Feng was puzzled and confused. When he left the center of the spaceship during the day, Lu Feng felt the chaotic feeling in this space. Of course, this wasn't what puzzled Lu Feng the most. What really puzzled him was the call from afar. In the beginning, this feeling lasted for a long time. However, it disappeared after a while. After waiting for a long time, waiting for him to go out with Mu Xueyan in the afternoon, the call was heard again. However, this time, it was obviously much weaker and didn't last for long. It could only be described as intermittent. All these changes made Lu Feng puzzled, and strange. Therefore, after he returned, he immediately investigated the origin of Kun. With a single glance, Lu Feng finally learned a lot of things that he didn't know before. Star Kun appeared 8,000 years ago. The person who discovered this Kunming first-level life planet was none other than the Divine King of the human race, the Divine King of Chaos. And his name is Shi Kunming. Legend has it that the Divine King of Chaos once fought a battle on another level with an ancient paragon of a different race in the Star of Kun. In the end, the Divine King of Chaos emerged victorious, while that alien paragon Divine King disappeared without a trace. In that case, it was reasonable for this place to have a sense of chaos. After all, the path of chaos, the incarnation of the Divine King of Chaos, is filled with the true essence of chaos. But what is that distant call? I have an inexplicable feeling that the call has nothing to do with me, but when I hear it, there is a strange connection. Lu Feng was silent. He didn't know what to do. If it only involved the secrets of the gods, Lu Feng would still dare to go and take a look himself. However, if it involved the Divine King, then he really did not have the strength to investigate. After all, anything related to the Supreme Divine King would be crowned as a heaven-shaking secret. If something really happened, even his parents wouldn't be able to protect him. Phew, forget it. I'll wait a few days. During this time, I'll inquire from the Mu family and see if anything strange has happened here. After making up his mind, Lu Feng stopped thinking about anything else. After putting down the Sky Network connector, Lu Feng entered his spiritual sea's divine plane and started his nightly cultivation. For Lu Fenglai, entering the spiritual sea's divine plane to cultivate was a kind of rest. Lu Feng understood that although he had already reached the very limit of his age and was comparable to or even surpassing the childhood of god-kings, he was still a god-king. He was still very far away from his goal. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't want to give up this cultivation time that shouldn't be wasted. The night passed very quickly. A night's worth of cultivation was equivalent to about 12 hours when it was running on its own. 8 hours of cultivation was equivalent to 12 hours of automatic cultivation, plus the automatic operation during the day. The amount of time Lu Feng spent cultivating the Primordial Sutra was actually 28 hours a day. According to his calculations, if this continued, Lu Feng would be able to complete the second realm of the Origin Sutra before he turned 19. Lu Feng was very satisfied with this. After all, once the second realm was completed, his strength would increase by another level. The next morning, Mu Xueyan had finished tidying everything up and was eating breakfast peacefully. When Lu Feng came down, she had already finished eating. Mu Xueyan woke up very early. Because it was only 7 o'clock, this time was indeed very early during the holidays. Lu Feng felt that he wasn't late for waking up, but compared to Mu Xueyan, he was still a little slower. As for Su Wenchao, Lu Feng didn't even need to think about it. This child was definitely still asleep, and he wouldn't wake up until noon. After smiling sweetly at Lu Feng, Mu Shuyan turned around and went to the room to change clothes. It had to be said that every girl loved to be beautiful, even if they were geniuses. Mu Shuyan finished breakfast at 7 o'clock, but when she came out of the room, it was already past 8 o'clock. She had spent an entire hour changing her clothes. This was what a woman was like. Looking at Lu Feng, she smiled and asked, "How is it, Lu Feng? Are you used to it here?" Lu Feng nodded his head gently. The conditions here were indeed very good. Although their dormitory was already very luxurious, there was still a certain gap between it and this place. And this place was even better than his home. Of course, Lu Feng was still used to living in his own home. For Lu Fenglai, these luxuries were no longer important. After all, Lu Feng had gone through too many hardships. Even if it was just a stone bed, he could sleep peacefully. "Oh yes, today I'll bring you to visit the special places of our Kunming city." After smiling mysteriously at Lu Feng, she didn't say anything else. As for where to go, Lu Feng didn't care. After all, he came here to relax. With a good tour guide like Mu Shuyan, it naturally saved Lu Feng a lot of trouble. Following behind Mu Shuyan, the two got into a top-notch luxury car and drove directly to the city center. A top-notch luxury car was indeed a top-notch luxury car. Not only was its speed terrifying, but it was also very safe and comfortable. Flying at a height of about 70 meters, there were no obstructions to speak of. So along the way, their speed almost reached the maximum speed of 1,500 kilometers per hour. After flying for more than 20 minutes, the two finally stopped. This place was still the same as the Mu family's villa, a place that belonged to the city center. Looking at the big sign in front of him, Lu Feng's face showed a trace of strange emotion. "Shuyan, this is the place you were talking about." On the sign in front of him, there were 4 big words clearly written on it: Fantasy World. Lu Feng had heard of the Fantasy World before, but it was only hearsay. This was because although the Fantasy World was a chain, it only had life planets that were level 2 or above. Cymbidium was only a level 3 life planet. Naturally, it didn't have such things. This fantasy world, as its name suggested, was a dreamlike world. However, this wasn't a sacred place for cultivation, nor was it a real paradise on Earth. This was actually an entertainment place. It could be said that everything in the Federation, except for those prohibited things, could be found in the fantasy world. For many people, this was the real fantasy world. "Shuyan, is this the place you were talking about?" Lu Feng couldn't imagine that Mu Shuyan would bring him here. After all, this was just some entertainment place. For ordinary people, it was a dreamlike world. But for them, it was completely dispensable. Mu Shuyan smiled mysteriously and said, "This place isn't what you think. Let's not talk about it. You'll know when you go in." "Lu Feng, you have to know that the headquarters of the fantasy world is on planet Kuan, and this is the headquarters of the fantasy world." After saying this, Mu Shuyan walked behind Lu Feng and directly pushed him inside. As for Lu Feng, he could only smile helplessly and walk in. Although the service of the fantasy world couldn't be compared to those top luxury centers, it was already considered the best among the entertainment places. As soon as they entered, a special service staff came up. It seemed that this place was more like a clubhouse center than an entertainment world. However, before the service staff approached, Mu Shuyan had already taken out an exquisite card from her arms. When they saw this card, they were slightly stunned. Their expressions changed slightly, and then they bowed their heads respectfully. "Okay, you can go down. My friend and I will go shopping by ourselves. We don't need you here." Seeing this, Lu Feng knew that Mu Shuyan should be here often. Otherwise, she wouldn't have a VIP card here. After seeing the service staff leave, Mu Shuyan took Lu Feng's hand and walked directly to a luxurious staircase. They went straight up, and 3 minutes later, the two walked down the staircase. At this time, only a huge door appeared in front of the two. It was an incomparably majestic huge door made of various alloys. Seeing the two of them walking over, the service staff guarding the door in front of the door walked over. At this time, Mu Shuiyan did the same thing again. She took out a card and dismissed the service staff, and directly pulled Lu Feng to the door. "Open it, my friend, and I want to go in and have some fun." Because of the existence of the VIP card, after the guards nodded, they entered a complicated password and opened the door. Lu Feng smiled slightly. "Shuiyan, what's inside? Why is the security so tight?" Mu Shuiyan still responded with a mysterious smile. She said, "The things inside are very interesting. You'll know when you go in." While talking, the door had already opened. The two of them finally walked in, looking at everything in front of him. Lu Feng's eyes showed a strange look. He really didn't expect that there would be such a thing in this fantasy world. Of course, what Lu Feng didn't expect the most was that Mu Shuiyan would actually come here. In his ears, countless shouts came, and it was as if the whole floor was going to explode. Of course, this was nothing. What really attracted Lu Feng was the huge ancient duel arena in front of him. Yes, it was a duel arena. In the most bustling city center, in the headquarters of this fantasy world, there was an incomparably huge duel arena. This was undoubtedly unimaginable. However, this duel arena wasn't a confrontation between people. What was happening here was a collision between beasts. What entered his eyes was countless people, and in this duel arena, there were only two huge beasts. Lu Feng wasn't very clear about the species of these two beasts. After all, he didn't specifically study this kind of thing. On the battlefield, the two beasts were colliding with each other. Just a casual collision could make the entire duel arena shake. A huge wound had already appeared on the body of one of the beasts. Countless dark green blood flowed out, changing the color of the entire duel arena. Such a scene was undoubtedly very hot-blooded, but it was really nothing to Lu Feng. The battles he had experienced weren't incomparably tragic, but such battles couldn't make him feel the slightest ripple in his heart. However, when Lu Feng asked and looked at Mu Shuiyan, he found that the young miss was looking at these with a bored expression. She didn't seem to hear Lu Feng's question. After Lu Feng asked again, she finally turned her head. "No, of course I didn't ask you to come here to see these. To be honest, the battles here are not only between beasts. Sometimes, it's a showdown between geniuses. I asked you to come here to see those geniuses fight." Chapter 262. A Duel Between Geniuses? Looking at Lu Feng's confused expression, Mu Shuiyan smiled slightly and explained, "This is called the Duel World. It's one of the most famous entertainment venues in the fantasy world. However, it's only available in the fantasy world of the Super Life planet. Of course, as the headquarters of the fantasy world, although Planet Kuan is only a first-level life planet, it also has a duel world. In the duel world, most of the time, the fantasy world collects beasts from various planets in the universe and lets them duel here for the entertainment of the spectators. However, sometimes there will be a duel between geniuses here, and such a duel is voluntary. Moreover, it's not easy to participate. Only those geniuses recognized by the Federation are qualified. Every genius who comes here to participate in the duel, regardless of whether they win or not, will receive a certain reward. This is undoubtedly a way out for those geniuses who don't have the support of any forces. Of course, life and death are not allowed here. After all, every genius is a precious treasure of the human race. They can't die because of such a duel." Hearing this, Lu Feng understood. To put it bluntly, the duel world was actually providing a duel arena to attract those geniuses to come here to duel. Of course, this alone wasn't enough to attract people. Therefore, the fantasy world offered a handsome reward. Moreover, regardless of whether they won or not, they would receive a certain amount of resources. In this way, many geniuses who didn't have any background and didn't want to be restricted would come here to fight for themselves. Over time, geniuses from families would also come here to challenge. After all, it wasn't easy to find an evenly matched genius outside. Even if you found one, the other party might not be willing to fight with you. However, it was different here. As long as you came to sign up and pass the qualification test, then there would definitely be a duel. In this way, not only would those geniuses find suitable opponents, but it would also increase their popularity in the fantasy world and allow them to earn a lot of income. Indeed, a very good business mind. There must be many forces behind this fantasy world. Otherwise, it's impossible to achieve this level. Those who came here weren't only geniuses without any background, but also many children and young masters of aristocratic families. If they only had an ordinary background, they wouldn't be able to do this. Mu Shuyan nodded gently. She naturally knew that Lu Feng would be able to guess it, and it wasn't a secret anyway. The dream world was created by 3 first-rate families. That's why it's able to become the best entertainment venue in the Federation. Lu Feng faintly smiled and asked, "Among the 3 first-rate families, your Mu family must be one of them, right?" Mu Shuyan naturally wouldn't deny it. After all, the headquarters was in the headquarters of the Mu clan's branch. If the Mu clan wasn't involved, no one would believe it. Our Heavenly Clouds galaxy has 2 first-rate families. One is our Mu family and the other is the Zhao family. Both our families are the bosses behind this fantasy world. Other than us, the other big family is the High family of the Red Sea galaxy. Lu Feng nodded gently. The Mu family, the Zhao family, and the High family were all first-rate families in the Federation. Although they couldn't be considered as the top families, they could still be ranked at a certain level. With the 3 families united, there weren't many people in the Federation who would dare to offend them. Glancing at Lu Feng, Mu Shuyan cautiously said, "Originally, I heard that there was a duel between 2 geniuses today, so I pulled you here. But I didn't expect that before the duel between the 2 geniuses, there would be a duel between berserk beasts. If I had known earlier, I would have come later." It could be seen that Mu Shuyan didn't like this kind of battle between berserk beasts. After all, a duel between berserk beasts was different from a competition between geniuses. Here, life and death had to be decided. For Mu Shuyan, who grew up in a family and hadn't experienced the test of slaughter and blood, it was naturally very uncomfortable. "It doesn't matter since I'm already here. It's not a big deal to take a look." After saying this, Lu Feng directly sat down on a seat in the back. Seeing Lu Feng sitting there, Mu Shuyan naturally didn't leave. She sat down next to Lu Feng. Originally, according to Mu Shuyan's status in the Mu family, it was not a big deal to ask for a top private room. But when she saw that Lu Feng didn't leave, she naturally wouldn't leave either. The battle went on very quickly. After all, the battle between berserk beasts was very direct. Finally, with a huge berserk beast more than 10 meters tall falling to the ground, the battle was over. At this time, several strong people came out of the duel arena. They waved their hands and subdued the berserk beast after the victory, dragged it back into a cage, and transported it out of the duel arena. Soon, hundreds of waiters came in. They quickly cleaned up the dark green and black blood in the arena, and it didn't take long for them to finish. This duel arena is really sturdy. Although the 2 berserk beasts looked terrifying, their strength was just average. The strength of the one that was killed was about the mid-rank of a high-level warrior, and the other one was at most a high-level warrior. However, although their level was only a high-level warrior, because of their huge size and the characteristics of berserk beasts, their destructive power was no less than that of an ordinary warrior. And under the limit of an ordinary warrior, it was enough to completely destroy a small city. But 2 berserk beasts with such powerful destructive power, in this life and death battle, didn't even destroy a trace of this place. There was no doubt that this was very surprising. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Mu Shiyan smiled slightly and explained to Lu Feng, "This duel arena is of course sturdy. Because just the cost of the duel arena alone cost our family trillions of funds. Moreover, this is just the cost of the duel arena. If it weren't for this reason, such duel arenas wouldn't only be built on those super-life planets." Mu Shiyan pointed to the walls that flickered with a metallic light and continued to introduce. "These metals are a special kind of synthetic material that our family bought from the divine race. According to the people of the divine race, unless it's a god-level attack, it's impossible to damage these metals." Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded lightly. The divine race, that was the peak overlord race of the universe, a powerful race at the same level as the human race. And the most outstanding thing about the divine race was technology. Their technology was a level higher than that of the human race. Before Lu Feng's metamorphosis, due to his passion for mecha battleships, he had done some research on those special metals. When he heard Mu Shiyan say that these metals were made by the divine race, he understood what kind of metals they were. "This is heavenly steel. I didn't expect your families to be so generous." Heavenly steel is a prohibited commodity in the divine race, because the amount of heavenly steel that the divine race can synthesize every year is not much, and the heavenly steel produced is used to build the key positions of those universe-level warships and interstellar fortresses. You three great clans actually managed to get your hands on something like this. Amazing, really amazing. Hearing Lu Feng's praise, Mu Shiyan blushed slightly. If it was someone else who praised her, then she would proudly accept it, but the person who praised her was Lu Feng. Lu Feng, that was the bloodline of the human king Lu family. Compared to the three great families, they were on a completely different level. If she didn't know that Lu Feng was sincerely praising her, Mu Shiyan would really think that Lu Feng was deliberately mocking her. "This is nothing. I think that if your Lu family wants it, then even if it's 100 times more heavenly steel than this, you can still get it." Lu Feng shrugged. He didn't deny this point. Soon, after the venue was cleaned up, a middle-aged man walked out of the duel arena. He walked to the middle of the huge duel arena, glanced around slightly, and suddenly spoke. "I think everyone has been waiting for a long time." The arena was quiet. Then, many people responded loudly. The middle-aged man smiled slightly and pressed his arm in the air, indicating for everyone to quiet down. Soon after, the arena regained its silence once again. Next, let me introduce the two sides of the battle. After all, this is what everyone is most interested in. This battle of geniuses is the top battle in my fantasy world. They are the two most powerful geniuses in the past year. They are both from the two great divine descendant clans, and their strength has reached the high level of the upheaval stage. Their combat strength is definitely at the level of a perfect grade warrior. These two are Feng Xiaoyang, a direct descendant of the first-rate Feng family, and Jiang Yimingming, a second-rate Jiang Yi family. After saying this, the middle-aged man walked to the side. At this time, two figures slowly landed in the duel arena. These two people were extremely young. According to Lu Feng's estimation, they were at most 25 years old. A 25-year-old high-ranking martial artist in the upheaval period was already very terrifying. Of course, this was still incomparable to the real top emperors of the younger generation. However, among the hundreds of thousands of young geniuses, only a few could be emperors. To be able to reach this level was already very powerful. Lu Feng, these two people are the best of the younger generation. Although Feng Xiaoyang is not the young master, he can be ranked in the top 5 of the Feng family. With the inheritance of the sacred truth body, once he activates his bloodline, even an ordinary perfect-grade warrior is no match for him. As for Jiang Yimingming, although he is from a second-rate family, the Jiang Yi family is the same as Su Wenchao's Su family. They are on the verge of becoming a first-rate family. Legend has it that their family's great ancestor has reached the edge of condensing the sacred truth body. As long as he can successfully break through, Jiang Yimingming's bloodline will be changed to a certain extent. At that time, I'm afraid his strength will increase by another level. Listening to Mu Xuyan's introduction, Lu Feng nodded slightly. At this moment, he understood Mu Xuyan's painstaking efforts. He had previously displayed the strength of an emperor. According to the calculation of the strength of an emperor, he should be able to fight against a warrior at the peak of the upheaval stage. Mu Xuyan dragged him here probably to let him see the strength of a warrior at the upheaval stage. Sure enough, in the next moment, Mu Xuyan spoke. You are now qualified to be an emperor. However, you have not come into contact with these geniuses, so this time, it should be of some help to you. Looking at Mu Xuyan's slightly proud face, Lu Feng smiled gently, but he did not explain anything. After all, this was Mu Xuyan's kind intentions. Chapter 263. Or the strength of an emperor. He who was at the peak evolution period was equivalent to a peak upheaval period martial artist. However, Lu Feng did not have the strength of an emperor. Moreover, this emperor was only the emperor of the human race in the Federation. It could not be compared to the emperor of massacre in the massacre abyss. Lu Feng had been able to suppress the 5 emperors of slaughter when he unleashed his full power before he reached the great accomplishment stage. Now, he was even more terrifying. He was absolutely horrifying. Perhaps these two people were already comparable to the initial stage of perfect stage martial artists. However, this was still a bit weak for Lu Fenglai. After all, he now had the confidence to suppress an ordinary middle stage perfect stage martial artist. Moreover, Mu Xuyan had miscalculated one thing. She thought that a person like Lu Feng, who was an unknown emperor, must have cultivated alone. Lu Feng must not have seen much of the strength of the younger generation. However, she would not have thought that Lu Feng's strength was completely obtained through fighting. In the battle of the Massacre Abyss Emperor, Lu Feng even collided with the emperors of massacre of different races. In terms of combat experience, these people were far inferior to him. However, this was Mu Xuyan's goodwill after all. Lu Feng naturally could not say anything. Therefore, he sat quietly in place, nodded pretentiously, and listened to Mu Xuyan's introduction there. All right. I won't say anything unnecessary. The next stage will be handed over to the 2 geniuses. After saying this, the middle-aged man suddenly disappeared. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. The strength of this middle-aged host was probably not simple. This kind of movement speed was definitely not something that an ordinary perfect stage martial artist could control. Compared to the 2 young people, Lu Feng was more concerned about this middle-aged host. This was because he could feel his blood boiling slightly from this middle-aged host. This was something that could only be felt between martial artists with similar strength. In other words, when he saw this host, Lu Feng had the urge to fight. Xuyan, who is this host? Upon hearing that Lu Feng was not asking about the 2 young geniuses, but the middle-aged host, Mu Xuyan was slightly stunned. However, she still shook her head, indicating that she didn't know. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng no longer paid attention to it. He began to look at the 2 young geniuses who were about to fight. Both of them were geniuses of the younger generation. Although they couldn't be compared to the young supremes, they were already considered top-notch among their peers. Even when facing those experts of the older generation, he would not be at a disadvantage. Moreover, both of them had the bloodline of God's descendants. Once their bloodline was awakened, they would have the battle strength of the perfect phase. This was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Warriors in the perfect stage could survive in the universe with their physical bodies. They could survive for a long time just by absorbing the power of heaven and earth in the universe. A martial artist of this level could even shatter those comets with a single strike of their strongest physical strength. It could be said that they were extremely terrifying. Therefore, the battle between the two was destined to set off monstrous waves. If not for the fact that this duel arena was completely made of heavenly steel, the two of them probably wouldn't dare to fight here. The battle began. Boundless and dazzling killing was fought, and in an instant, the entire duel arena was filled with a sense of turbulence. However, many existences outside the duel arena no longer cared about this. They just screamed and roared crazily. These people had already been affected by the violent emotions brought about by the confrontation between geniuses. So powerful! They are indeed peerless geniuses of the gods' descendants' bloodline. Their strength is not inferior even when facing those terrifying existences of the older generation. If this heavenly steel hadn't withstood the battle between two demigods and not been damaged, I'm afraid that the people present would really not dare to stay here. Mu Shuyan didn't lose her composure like that. However, she faintly felt a kind of psychological tremor, a kind of slight excitement. Compared to the confrontation between the older generation, the confrontation between the younger generation was more emotional. After all, the younger generation represented the hot-bloodedness of advancing courageously. At the end of the fight, the two sides had already fought hundreds of times. Any bit of the power that leaked out was enough to defeat an ordinary evolution stage warrior. At this time, the battle strength had already been raised to the peak of the upheaval stage by the two of them. This already belonged to the truly terrifying battle strength. Tragic, incomparably tragic. There were countless wounds and blood filled the sky. However, the two of them didn't care about this. Although they hadn't entered the massacre abyss, they were also geniuses who had grown through countless battles. Therefore, these wounds didn't bring fear, but a kind of extreme boiling. Kill! Kill! Two heaven-shaking roars finally erupted. No longer holding back, the most powerful trump card, the power of the bloodline finally completely erupted. At this moment, the most powerful blessing appeared, and the shackles of imprisonment shattered in an instant. Perfect stage. This is the battle strength of the perfect stage. The final confrontation has finally arrived. Excited, everyone was excited. They were all people with status, and their bodyguards were all at the martial artist level. Some of the more honorable existences even had martial artists at the upheaval stage as bodyguards. However, these guards were only there to protect their safety. The dignity of warriors couldn't let them perform to please these employers. Therefore, although their status was noble, these people hadn't seen many collisions between warriors, let alone this kind of perfect stage confrontation. Looking at the slightly deranged crowd, Lu Feng sighed deeply. I have to say, the three of you really know how to capture the hearts of these people. They are just ordinary people. Although they have shocking wealth, they can't become strong in the end. However, everyone yearns to be strong. Therefore, you used this kind of method to attract these people and control these connections and resources in your hand. The wealth accumulated through this method is definitely an astronomical figure. Not bad, really not bad. Hearing Lu Feng's praise, Mu Shuyan smiled indifferently. All of this had nothing to do with her. She only cared about the magnificence of this battle. Alright, Lu Feng, who do you think will win? The battle had already reached a white-hot level, and it was the kind of crazy output. On the surface, this battle seemed to be evenly matched. However, there would always be a winner in a battle. Therefore, at this time, Mu Shuyan opened her mouth and asked Lu Feng. After all, in her heart, Lu Feng was almost omnipotent. Lu Feng looked at the crazy collisions in the field, and there wasn't much excitement on his face. He hesitated for a moment and finally said, "Both of them are quite strong. Moreover, they are evenly matched. Therefore, if you want to win in the end, you have to rely on willpower. Only those with strong willpower can win in the end. As for me, I think that Jiang Yeming will win." Jiang Yiming might not be as talented as Feng Xiaoyang. After all, Feng Xiaoyang was from a first-class family, and he was the inheritor of the sacred truth body. However, in terms of resources, he was better than Feng Xiaoyang. He was the young master of the Jiang Yiming family, and the resources he could use were better than Feng Xiaoyang. Once these two sides offset each other, then the strength of both sides was basically above the level. However, this Jiang Yiming had an aura that Lu Feng felt familiar with. That was madness. In his eyes, there was a kind of stubbornness or madness. A genius with such an expression had an extremely terrifying willpower. This was because Lu Feng was such a person. Compared to Jiang Yiming, Lu Feng understood more about the terrifying effect of this madness. Therefore, he thought highly of Jiang Yiming. I think that Feng Xiaoyang will win. After all, he is the inheritor of the sacred truth body. Once he explodes in the end, Jiang Yiming shouldn't be able to resist. Mu Xuyan's thoughts were the same as most of the people in the field. Therefore, in her opinion, Feng Xiaoyang should be able to win. Lu Feng smiled faintly and said softly, "Is aptitude really that important?" At this moment, Mu Xuyan was completely attracted by the suffocating pace of the battle. Therefore, she didn't hear Lu Feng's last words. Finally, the final battle had appeared. That was an extremely powerful collision. For the sake of the final victory, both of them had used their respective trump cards. Although they were not supreme techniques, they were both martial techniques that had been passed down in their respective clans. The degree of their strength was only slightly below supreme technique. In an instant, a shocking tremor spread throughout the entire arena. The people sitting on the viewing platform felt the entire floor shake. However, they weren't afraid because they had witnessed a battle between demigods here. If a demigod's strength couldn't shatter the heavenly steel, then the two people who were only at the initial stage of perfection couldn't either. The primogenitors of the two great families had been summoned by the activation of their bloodlines. Obviously, Feng Xiaoyang's primogenitor image was stronger than Jiang Yiming's. After all, the difference between the two was quite big. However, Jiang Yiming's primogenitor image was much more substantial. This, once again, narrowed the gap between the two. When the final attack appeared, the two sides separated immediately after contact. However, the terrifying shockwaves caused by the collision shocked everyone. Both sides were sent flying far away, unable to move an inch. At this moment, the entire arena was silent. "A draw, it's actually a draw. Damn it, I guessed wrong again this time." The strength of both of them is indeed terrifying. For a long time, both of them lay quietly on the ground, not moving at all. At this moment, the sound of a countdown was heard. Everyone understood that this battle was going to end in a draw. At this moment, Mu Xuyan smiled sweetly at Lu Feng and said, "Although I guessed wrong this time, you won't win." "Oh, I guessed wrong, but you didn't win either." Looking at Mu Xuyan's mischievous expression, Lu Feng smiled nonchalantly and pointed to the center of the arena. He said slowly, "That's not necessarily true." Hearing this, Mu Xuyan was slightly taken aback and quickly looked at the arena. However, in the next moment, her little mouth opened slightly with a slightly shocked expression. Chapter 264. In the arena, the two people who had been silent for a long time finally started to move. What a strong willpower! They have forgotten everything for the sake of victory. They are still able to stand up with such heavy injuries. This is simply too terrifying. He struggled for a while, failed twice, he failed many times. Finally, when he failed for the last time, Feng Xiaoyang fell to the ground and seemed to have lost consciousness. However, Jiang Yiming was still persevering. At this moment, everyone, regardless of whether they supported Jiang Yiming or not, was shouting his name. His spirit and willpower had touched everyone. At the last moment, Jiang Yiming really stood up. Although he was only swaying, as if a gust of wind could knock him down again. However, he still stood up in the end. In his eyes, there was a kind of confusion after a kind of crazed burning. Lu Feng knew that he had reached his limit. If not for the support of his willpower, he would not have been able to stand up at all. The moment the victory was announced, he could no longer bear it and fainted completely. Jiang Yeming's victory was beyond the expectations of many people. After all, in their eyes, the inheritor of the sacred truth body, Feng Xiaoyang, should be stronger. However, the result was as such. These people understood that there was no exaggeration in this battle. If they were to do it again, the result would not change at all. Lu Feng, you are indeed better. You were right in the end. If Lu Feng had only guessed the result, it would not have been a big deal even if he won. However, Lu Feng had analyzed the process of its final appearance. He had said that Jiang Yeming's willpower was stronger. In the end, it was a battle of willpower. In the end, it was just as Lu Feng had said. This made Mu Xuyan admire and worship Lu Feng very much. Lu Feng smiled and shrugged. Perhaps in Mu Xuyan's eyes, such a battle was very terrifying. But from Lu Feng's point of view, this was really a meaningless battle. Perhaps Lu Feng hadn't fought with a perfect stage warrior yet, but seeing the two of them raise their power to the perfect stage at the last moment, Lu Feng knew that he didn't need to use all his trump cards to suppress the two of them at the same time. He did indeed have the strength to suppress those in the perfect phase. All right. He had finished reading. Let's go eat. After saying this, Mu Xuyan stood up and pulled Lu Feng away. Lu Feng didn't care. Watching this kind of battle might help others improve, but it didn't help him at all. She nodded gently, stood up, and followed Mu Xuyan to leave. However, just as they were about to turn around and leave, suddenly, a voice filled with surprise and joy could be heard. Cousin Xuyan, when did you come back? Hearing this, Lu Feng clearly felt Mu Xuyan stiffen slightly. However, she quickly recovered. She turned around and a slightly stiff smile appeared on her face. Mu Xuyan looked at the young and handsome man walking over and said, "Cousin, why are you here?" Hearing Mu Xuyan's words, the young man showed a kind of warm smile. But this smile was extremely hypocritical in Lu Feng's eyes. He could clearly see the arrogance and possessiveness hidden in this smile. Such a person, in layman's terms, was a hypocrite. "I have nothing to do recently, so I came here to wander around. I didn't expect to see you here. I say, Xueyan, what you're doing is really wrong. We grew up together, but you didn't even inform me when you came back." Mu Xuyan's stiff smile became even stiffer. She glanced at Lu Feng beside her and saw that he still had an indifferent look on his face. Finally, she quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Although she did it quietly, her performance was clearly displayed in the eyes of Lu Feng and the man. Seeing this scene, a trace of viciousness flashed in the man's eyes. Lu Feng saw these changes and just stood there indifferently. But he also understood that he was probably going to run into some trouble. Sure enough, the man changed the topic to Lu Feng. He said, "Cousin, why don't you introduce your classmate to me?" Hearing this, Lu Feng also knew that the man probably already knew everything. The news that Mu Xuyan brought two classmates back was not a secret. It was very easy for people who wanted to know. Soon, as if she had already adjusted, Mu Xuyan was no longer as stiff as before. After glancing at Lu Feng, she said, "This is my classmate, Lu Feng, from the Cymbidium." After saying this, Mu Xuyan hesitated slightly. In the end, she actually hugged Lu Feng's arm in front of everyone's eyes and continued, "Lu Feng, he is my cousin, a direct descendant of the main bloodline, Mu Shi Mu." Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't care, but Mu Shi Mu's eyes were slightly stiff. In this introduction, it was obvious that they were close to each other. But after all, he was a direct descendant of a first-rate family. Mu Shi Mu's eyes quickly returned to normal. Although he was smiling, there was an incomparably sharp smile in his eyes, as if he wanted to obliterate Lu Feng. Oh, so you are a top student from the Federal University. May I know which family brother Lu is a descendant of? Lu Feng didn't answer. Lu Feng couldn't stand this kind of hypocrite the most. And he did have the right to not stand this kind of person. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Mu Shimu clearly felt that he couldn't suppress his anger. Originally, he thought that Mu Shuyan would definitely be one of his people. After all, although Mu Shuyan's aptitude was one of the top in the main bloodline, she was still a member of a branch bloodline. And the main bloodline also hoped that Mu Shuyan could marry into the main bloodline and become a true member of the main bloodline, continuing the bloodline of the Mu family. He, Mu Shimu, was the Mu family's internal candidate for marriage. Mu Shimu was very satisfied with Mu Shuyan. After all, Mu Shuyan now had the appearance of a devastatingly beautiful woman. It probably wouldn't be long before she truly became one of the most beautiful women in the Federation. Moreover, Mu Shuyan's talent was indeed not bad. Although she cultivated the path of a psychic, the Mu family was the inheritor of the sacred truth body, so it naturally didn't affect her aptitude. It was precisely because of these reasons that he had never relaxed when it came to Mu Shuyan. As soon as he received the news that Mu Shuyan had returned yesterday, he came here today. However, he didn't expect that Lu Feng would appear out of nowhere. And from the looks of it, this Lu Feng seemed to be the person that Mu Shuyan had chosen. This made him feel a kind of anger. From the beginning, Mu Shuyan had always been his exclusive property. Now, she was seen as his woman, but she was nestled in someone else's arms. Mu Shimu was naturally incomparably angry. Moreover, this Lu Feng seemed to be unwilling to talk to him, which made him lose his mind even more. However, as a child of the Mu family, he still had a little control. Before he figured out the identity of this Lu Feng, he couldn't do anything rashly. Seeing that the atmosphere had become stiff, Mu Shuyan was slightly anxious. Although she didn't like this cousin at all, and was even a little annoyed, it wasn't good to let the atmosphere remain in a deadlock. Therefore, she spoke. Cousin, Lu Feng is a member of the Cymbidium. As for the family, Mu Shuyan didn't say anything because she didn't want to lie, and obviously didn't want to reveal Lu Feng's identity in a situation where Lu Feng didn't want to. Therefore, she didn't continue. However, it was clear that Mu Shimu misunderstood Lu Feng. Cymbidium, if it weren't for Mu Shuyan going there to study, and if it weren't for Li Tianlai bringing 10 specially recruited people, he probably wouldn't have known that there was such a third-level life planet called Cymbidium in his life. Since he had determined that Lu Feng didn't have any identity, naturally Mu Shimu was not afraid of anything. His complexion turned pale in an instant. What's wrong? This Lu Feng classmate doesn't seem to like me. He doesn't even want to talk to me. Lu Feng still didn't say anything. The Mu family was a first-class family, and it was still relatively close to the front, but in his eyes, it was nothing. Perhaps he didn't have the possibility to fight against them now, but as long as he was given time, not to mention a first-class family, even those super families were nothing in his eyes. The more aggressive the other party was, the more disdainful Lu Feng was. Seeing that Lu Feng still had that kind of indifferent expression, the anger in Mu Shimu's heart finally couldn't be restrained. Because this kind of indifference to him was naked disregard. This was even more unacceptable than being looked down upon. Sure enough, it's not good if you're not from a big family. With this kind of attitude, I'm afraid the elders aren't good people either. These words were really a bit too much. Hearing this, Lu Feng finally looked at him for the first time. It was just that this gaze carried too much coldness. I don't want to talk to you because of one thing, and that is, you're not qualified. What's more, how my parents are, a little person like you isn't qualified to judge. Parents were a taboo in Lu Feng's heart. It could be said that Lu Tao and his wife were irreplaceable in Lu Feng's heart. Back then, the two of them could separate from the human king Lu family for him. For him, they could kill emperors. For him, they could face hundreds of millions of powerhouses. How could Lu Feng allow someone to insult such parents? Therefore, when his voice fell, Lu Feng made his move, one punch, just one punch. But this punch carried a lot of power. The human king's bloodline power had already appeared a little. Although it wasn't boiling to the limit, it was still used to a certain extent. The limit of the realm comprehension, the cultivation method had reached the level of 8 times, and the support of the human king's bloodline power. Apart from not using the great demonic power and that strange power, it could be said that Lu Feng had already used an extremely powerful force. Seeing this punch coming, Mu Shimu's expression was completely restrained, and a touch of light and shock appeared in his eyes. Everything before might have been his nature, but it was also a kind of cover-up. His strength had already reached the initial stage of the upheaval transformation stage. Although he couldn't compare to the 2 people who had just fought, he was much younger than the 2 of them. Naturally, he could feel the terrifying power that Lu Feng's punch carried. This was a supreme attack that could even destroy the middle stage of the upheaval transformation stage. Therefore, he used all of his strength. In an instant, the bloodline of the Mu family's sacred truth physique was fully released. His combat strength was fully unleashed, and he reached the extreme stage. One punch, also one punch, colliding with Lu Feng's powerful force. This wasn't the arena, and there was no heavenly steel protection. If their collision really happened, then not to mention this level, perhaps the entire illusory world would be affected by the terrifying impact. It might even be completely shattered because of this. However, at the last moment of the collision, a figure appeared. He had easily caught Mu Tianmu's powerful attack with one hand, while his other hand had also caught Lu Feng's supreme killing intent. There was no smoke and fire, and it was relaxed and indifferent. This kind of ease made people look sideways. Just like that, the 2 terrifying attacks disappeared in the hands of a single person. Chapter 265. The 2 of you, this place isn't suitable for a duel. If you want to fight, you can enter this duel arena. I can make the decision and give you a single duel here. His smile was always there, but the threatening look in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Seeing this person, Lu Feng and Mu Tianmu both went silent. After a long while, the 2 withdrew their aura at the same time. Mu Tianmu lowered his head slightly and said, "Uncle Zhao, I understand." After saying this, he turned around to leave. But before he left, Mu Tianmu turned around to look at Lu Feng and suddenly said, "In 3 days, Shiyan's coming-of-age ceremony will be held at the main branch. If you have the guts, you can come and teach me then." Although Lu Feng made a shocking attack, although he also knew that if Uncle Zhao didn't appear this time, he might really have died, Mu Tianmu wasn't an idiot. However, Mu Tianmu wasn't an idiot. This was planet Kuan, the Mu family's territory. He couldn't deal with it, but it didn't mean that others couldn't. And 3 days later, if this young man really dared to come, then someone would stand up for him. So, he said those words to Lu Feng at the end. But Lu Feng chose to ignore his words again. Because at this moment, Lu Feng was quietly looking at the figure in front of him. Seeing this scene, Mu Tianmu fiercely glared at Lu Feng but didn't say anything. His strength wasn't on par with the other party, yet he still wantonly provoked him here. This was simply asking for humiliation. So, he left like a hoodlum. Seeing that everyone had disappeared, Mu Shuiyan let out a sigh of relief. She wasn't worried that Lu Feng would have any problems. After all, she still had some say in Kuan Planet, and with Lu Feng's identity, she really didn't have to worry about anything. Mu Shuiyan walked in front of that expert and hesitated for a moment before saying thank you. But after hearing Mu Shuiyan's thanks, Uncle Zhao clearly showed a kind expression that was different from how he treated Lu Feng and Mu Tianmu. He said, "You're Mu Tianmu's girl, Shuiyan, right? As expected, you're devastatingly beautiful." It's not surprising for these two brats to fight for you. Hearing that this person actually knew her father, Mu Shuiyan didn't dare to be too presumptuous. But she secretly glanced at Lu Feng and found that Lu Feng still didn't look at her. This couldn't help but make Mu Shuiyan a little angry. At this moment, Lu Feng did not care about anything else. Regardless of whether it was Mu Shuiyan's hidden bitterness or Mu Shixin's scheming provocation, Lu Feng did not care at all. In his eyes, there was only Uncle Zhao in front of him, or the host. Lu Feng's zest, perfect middle stage strength? Hearing Lu Feng call out his strength, Uncle Zhao was clearly a little surprised. Although he couldn't see through Lu Feng's strength before, he still felt it the moment Lu Feng made his move. Lu Feng's strength was at the peak of the evolution stage. To have the strength of the peak of the evolution stage at this age was already very terrifying. But no matter how terrifying it was, he shouldn't be able to see through his strength. Oh? I didn't expect you to be able to see through my strength. Looking at the attack you used just now, there's actually a trace of that great bloodline fused into it. You're a direct descendant of the Lu family, right? The Lu family referred to the first-rate Lu family. When people talked about the Super Lu family, they would respectfully call them the Human King Lu family. Usually, as long as they talked about the Lu family, they would usually refer to the first-rate Lu family. Lu Feng didn't deny it, nor did he admit it. He was just thinking about it slightly. When he saw Uncle Zhao before, Lu Feng vaguely felt an impulse in his heart. It was a kind of fighting spirit. In the time realm, he had cultivated for 1,300 days, which was equivalent to more than 3 years. Over the past 3 years, everything had already reached its peak. However, during this period, Lu Feng didn't fight once. After coming out, although he made a move once, the opponent was too weak. It couldn't be considered a fight at all. Therefore, Lu Feng's fighting spirit couldn't help but tremble after seeing a suitable opponent. He hesitated for a moment. He wanted to suppress the vigorous battle intent in his heart, but he found that it was futile. The more he suppressed it, the stronger the desire to battle in his blood became. It even began to become an aura that was slightly exposed on the surface of his body. Recently, I've made some progress in my cultivation. I'm eager to fight. I wonder if you're willing to accept the challenge. This Uncle Zhao had the strength of a middle stage perfect stage, and he had just stepped into the middle stage perfect stage. However, Lu Feng could feel that he could definitely suppress a middle stage perfect stage martial artist, because he had the bloodline of a god. And Lu Feng, although in theory, was enough to suppress a middle stage perfect stage martial artist, he had never really achieved it. Therefore, after cultivating to this stage, he wanted to try and see if he really had such strength. Hearing Lu Feng's challenge, Uncle Zhao was stunned, and so was Mu Shuiyan. However, after a while, both of their expressions changed. Mu Shuiyan was shocked and worried. She had seen Uncle Zhao's strength. With just one arm, he easily caught Lu Feng's powerful blow. Although Lu Feng had once sent an upheaval stage martial artist flying with one hand, Director Shui was only a beginner stage martial artist. And this Uncle Zhao was in the perfect stage. He was even a middle stage perfect stage martial artist. The gap between the two was too big. Therefore, Lu Feng's provocation was simply courting death. Therefore, a trace of anxiety appeared on Mu Shuiyan's face. She wanted to dissuade him, but when she saw Lu Feng's determined look, she couldn't say anything. She could only look at Uncle Zhao with a pleading look. As for Uncle Zhao, it was obvious that he was amused by what he had just seen. After all, in his opinion, although Lu Feng was a peerless genius and even had the possibility of becoming an emperor, in the future, he was destined to surpass him. However, at present, compared to him, Lu Feng was still too weak. The gap between them was too big. You want to challenge me? Are you sure you want to challenge me? In Uncle Zhao's opinion, everything was a joke. You should know that my strength is at the middle stage, perfect stage. Although I have just advanced, as a god's descendant, you should be able to feel that I am also a god's descendant. The bloodline of the Zhao family is also inherited from the sacred truth body. Therefore, my strength is not weak in the face of a high-stage, perfect stage martial artist. I can even fight against them. And your realm is at the peak evolution stage. The gap between us is close to 2 big levels. Although you are a member of the Lu family and have a trace of the human monarch's bloodline, even if you have the real human monarch's bloodline, you will absolutely not be able to fight against me. So, do you still want to challenge me? Although he had just reached the middle stage perfect stage a few days ago and was not even comparable to those ordinary middle stage perfect stage martial artists, his strength was already comparable to a high stage perfect stage martial artist because of his bloodline. The disparity between him and Lu Feng was simply far too great. When she heard Uncle Zhao reveal her identity, Mu Shuiyan became even more anxious. She no longer had any scruples and said directly to Uncle Zhao, "Uncle Zhao, I remember that you are the uncle of the Zhao family. I have heard my father mention you many times. This time, since you are here, you must come to the Mu family and visit us." After saying this, Mu Shuiyan reached out her hand and tried to pull Uncle Zhao back. When he saw this scene, Uncle Zhao also understood that Mu Shuiyan wanted to distract him and make this completely unequal competition disappear into nothingness. And he was happy to do so. After all, although Lu Feng was of the Lu family's bloodline and had the possibility of becoming an emperor, the gap between him and Uncle Zhao was too big. Uncle Zhao has to go this time. Shuiyan, lead the way. Mu Shuiyan knew that Uncle Zhao had understood her meaning, and a touch of gratitude appeared in her eyes. She nodded firmly and turned to leave. Uncle Zhao did the same. He followed closely behind Mu Shuiyan, as if he had forgotten about Lu Feng's existence. For them, this might be the best ending. However, they still didn't see Lu Feng clearly. They didn't see what kind of person Lu Feng was. Since his debut, Lu Feng had faced countless opponents. No matter if they were stronger or weaker than him, he had never taken half a step back. Even in the face of countless life and death situations, he still didn't forget his glory. And now, Lu Feng was a perfect stage martial artist who seemed unreachable and impossible to compete with in the eyes of others. It wasn't as if he didn't have the strength to fight. It was really too difficult for him to meet a suitable opponent. Therefore, the moment he saw Uncle Zhao, when he felt the aura that was on par with his own, Lu Feng finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He looked at the 2 people who were about to leave. Lu Feng had already walked in front of the 2 people in 1 step. He looked at Uncle Zhao quietly and said slowly, "Can we have a fight?" As he spoke, he had already placed his arm on his chest. This was a kind of etiquette between martial artists, a kind of challenge. The moment he saw this etiquette, Uncle Zhao fell silent. After an endless silence, he sighed slowly after a long time. With an inexplicable sense of vicissitudes, he spoke slowly and heavily. "What a familiar etiquette. I remember when I was very young. At that time, between us, we used this kind of etiquette to start all challenges. It's just that I don't know when it started, but we became strong. From then on, there were only interests between us, only victory and defeat, and we forgot the glory of martial artists." Uncle Zhao slowly lowered his head, as if he was reminiscing about the memories. But soon, he raised his head again. At this time, what faced him was a pair of scorching eyes. It was a pair of eyes full of infinite fighting spirit, a pair of eyes that contained the strongest fighting spirit. His heart trembled slightly. He didn't know what was going on, but the moment he saw Lu Feng's eyes, the pure martial artist memories of his childhood came back. At that time, they were just pure martial artists. There was no family, no race, and no disputes of interests. You want to fight, then let's fight. For some reason, this time, Uncle Zhao didn't want to think about anything else. Just for Lu Feng's pair of eyes that were filled with scorching fighting spirit, he had to agree. In an instant, his aura rose, and at the same time, Lu Feng seemed to have entered another realm. The aura between the two sides began to erupt at this moment. Seeing this scene, Mu Xuyen could only sigh deeply. She did so much just in hopes that Lu Feng wouldn't be hurt. A collision between martial artists, even if it was just a spar, would leave countless scars. This was something that Mu Xuyen really didn't want to see. But she also knew that once Lu Feng made up his mind, she couldn't stop him at all. This was a battle between them using the glory of martial artists. This place can't withstand the power of our collision, so let's enter the arena. Over there, I think whether it's you or me, we should be able to fight to our heart's content. Lu Feng knew that if they collided here, once he unleashed his full combat power, it would definitely cause a boundless disaster. It was very likely that the entire Kunming city would be destroyed. Lu Feng didn't want to see such a situation, and so did Uncle Zhao. Although Uncle Zhao didn't think so, in his opinion, as long as he attacked, he could end the battle in an instant. But since Lu Feng made the request, he had to agree. Soon, the two of them walked towards the arena. And behind them, Mu Xuyen sighed deeply and followed closely behind Lu Feng and Uncle Zhao. Chapter 266. At this moment, there weren't many people left in the arena. Most of the spectators had already left. As for the rest, they all came out from the luxurious private rooms. They were all truly noble people. Seeing Lu Feng and Uncle Zhao walk into the arena, Uncle Zhao was shocked. These people all stopped in their tracks. However, when they saw that the two of them were about to fight, some people immediately turned around and left. In their hearts, this young man had gone crazy from wanting to become famous. The reason he did this was probably to make a name for himself in front of these people. They disdained such people the most. Therefore, they didn't stop at all. They turned around and left. Of course, there was still a small group of people who didn't leave immediately. They stood there quietly and watched the two people in the middle of the field. Why? Is young Master Guanglai interested in this kind of battle? In the most luxurious private room, 3 young people stood quietly. Originally, they had planned to leave, but when they saw that the noblest young master had stayed behind, the other 2 did not leave. Instead, they stood there as well. The Guanglai young master smiled faintly. However, there was an indescribable shock in his smile. However, the 2 people in the surroundings couldn't see this. They were only wondering why this honorable person from the Battle God clan's royal branch would be interested in such a battle. I didn't expect him to be here. He actually wants to challenge a perfect stage martial artist. Could it be that in such a short period of time, he has already reached such a stage? Young Master Guanglai had recognized him. He recognized Lu Fenglai. Not long ago, he had defeated 3 gods of massacre, but he still had not received the recognition of the other kings of massacre. Even though he knew that there was no hope for the massacre emperor, he chose to leave. At this time, he was invited by some good friends of the human race and came to the human race. Originally, he had been invited to watch the battle between the geniuses of the human race. However, although that battle was exciting, it didn't leave much of an impression on him. After all, this kind of strength was nothing in the massacre abyss during its upheaval. No matter if it was Feng Xiaoyang or Jiang Yeming, they were most likely at the edge of the massacre abyss during the period of upheaval. Moreover, it was only strength. If they really wanted to fight for it, it would be impossible for them, who had not experienced much killing, to obtain the god of massacre. After watching a rather boring battle, Guanglai Gongzi was about to leave. But at this moment, he saw it. He saw that figure. Guanglai Gongzi still remembered that not long ago. It was this figure that caused a huge commotion in the massacre abyss. That was true terror. Although he was only a high-level warrior in the Abyss War, The terror he showed made those perfect stage slaughter emperors tremble. Hearing Guanglai young master's words, the two young masters were slightly stunned. Then, they revealed a dignified expression and looked at Lu Feng in the middle of the field. They naturally knew the identity and strength of this Guanglai young master. Although he had failed to become the slaughtering emperor, his strength was enough to make him a young supremacy of the human race. He actually had such an expression towards Lu Feng. It could be seen that this Lu Feng was really not simple. I wonder who this young man is. He even heard of Guanglai young master. The young master of the Zhao family was also the young master of the Zhao family. If he did not come here, then that Uncle Zhao would not appear in such an entertainment place as a Bulsh * tea host. Hearing young Master Zhao's question, Guanglai young master did not have any smile on his face. After a long time, he slowly said, "Clear the field. Get all of them to leave this place. They are not qualified to watch such a battle. Tell everyone to leave." As soon as these words came out, the two young masters were greatly shocked. Clear the field. They actually wanted to clear the field for this young man. And the reason was that they were not qualified to watch such a battle. This was truly a little inconceivable. This, the last young master who did not speak hesitated for a moment. This fantasy world was funded by the three families at the same time. Although he was the young master of the High family, if he suddenly cleared the field and offended the spectators, they would also have to bear a certain amount of pressure. Seeing the expressions of these two, Guanglai young master's face was extremely solemn. Clear the field. What was the point of offending these people? They are just a bunch of ants. What qualifications do they have to watch his battle? If you are not the young master, then you are not qualified to watch. This time, the two finally saw Guanglai young master's seriousness. Both of them were decisive people. They naturally understood that if they did not clear the field, then they would offend this Guanglai young master. Compared to Guanglai young master's identity, these people in the field were really nothing. He took out the Sky Network and directly said, "Clear the field within 1 minute." A few seconds after his voice fell, many management personnel of the fantasy world appeared. They directly walked in front of the spectators and used various excuses to clear the field. Although these people were very dissatisfied, they did not want to offend the fantasy world. After receiving a certain amount of compensation, these people finally chose to leave. In less than a minute, everyone had already begun to leave. Looking at the two people who slowly walked into the field, young Master Hai asked, "Now, Guanglai young master, can you tell us about this young man's identity?" Guanglai smiled faintly. However, this smile also contained a great sense of dread. Seeing this scene, the two young masters were slightly shocked. In the fantasy world, there were countless special instruments. Everyone's strength could be seen at a glance. They discovered that Lu Feng's strength was only at the peak evolution stage. In their previous understanding, if this kind of strength wanted to challenge Uncle Zhao, who was at the middle perfect stage, it was undoubtedly courting death. But now it was different. Because of Guanglai young master, who was enough to be titled as the Emperor of the human race, the young Supreme Existence's attitude. He was really too cautious and too shocked. And now, his performance let the two know that this young man was terrifying. He is called Lu Feng. He has also been to the Massacre Abyss before. On the first day, he became the Son of Massacre, and then the Sky of Massacre. On the second day, he became the God of Massacre. On the third day, he was titled Emperor. Hiss, two sounds of cold air being sucked in came. They looked at Lu Feng, who was in the middle of the field, in horror. They could not believe that this young existence had obtained the title of the Emperor of Massacre. Titled Emperor. Don't tell me that the other emperors of the same realm just watched as he was given such a domineering title? Hearing this, Guanglai young master smiled bitterly. How is that possible? Every Emperor of Massacre, even when facing the King of Massacre, would not easily admit defeat. Furthermore, this title of emperor was given by Lu Feng himself. He did not get the recognition of the Emperor of Massacre in the battle with the god of massacre. He forced them to admit it. He defeated the Emperor of Slaughter and forced them to acknowledge his identity. To defeat the Emperor of Massacre and make him admit his identity, what kind of terrifying aptitude and terrifying strength did that require? It was not an exaggeration to say that he was invincible in the same realm. He fought with the Emperor of Massacre of the same realm? And he won all of them? Young Master Zhao asked with a shocked face. However, Guanglai young master shook his head lightly. He did not win, nor did he lose. The final result was a draw. How could he be recognized by others if it was a draw? After all, his title was not an ordinary emperor, but an emperor. Because his opponents were the 5 emperors of Massacre. He fought against the 5 emperors of Massacre with his own strength, and in the end, it was a draw. The 2 young masters of first-rate families were naturally talented. Although they did not have the title of young emperor, it was not a problem for them to enter the massacre abyss and be given the title of god of massacre. At this moment, they, who had seen countless big scenes, were rooted to the ground, stunned. My name is Zhao Dongxing. Your name is Lu Feng, right? Although I don't know why you have the confidence to challenge me, I have already promised you. So, try your best. Then do your best. Let me see what makes you so arrogant. In the center of the duel field, Zhao Dongxing had a wild expression. Although he could not be considered a top genius, he had become a perfect stage martial artist and had the bloodline of a god. As a peak evolution stage martial artist, he indeed had the qualifications to be wild. Lu Feng smiled. That was a kind of incomparably wild smile. He nodded lightly. Then, his bloodline awakened. Endless domineering pressure, nobility, and majesty appeared in an instant. Behind Lu Feng, a terrifying incarnation appeared. That was endless nobility. That was a great existence that made time and space submit. Seeing this clearly visible figure, a few exclamations were heard. Perfect human monarch bloodline. Human monarch bloodline. Human monarch Lu family's bloodline inheritor. At this moment, horror spread. Human monarch bloodline was a terrifying godlike existence in the human race. And at this moment, these people finally knew the nobility of Lu Feng's identity. Zhao Dongxing took a deep breath. The horror in his eyes did not completely disappear. I thought that you were only a descendant of the Lu family. I didn't expect that you were actually a descendant of the human monarch Lu family. You are even a direct descendant. Lu Feng, Lu Feng. As expected, your surname is Lu. At this moment, Zhao Dongxing thought of Mu Tianmu, who had previously provoked Lu Feng. That disciple of the Mu family's main bloodline thought that he was very noble in front of Lu Feng. However, the moment Lu Feng's identity appeared, it was simply a joke. It was a complete joke. Ignoring him was not because he was afraid, not because he was arrogant and ignorant, but because Mu Tianmu's identity was indeed too lowly. Compared to this young man's identity, being a direct descendant of the Mu family was simply an existence like a joke. Human monarch bloodline is indeed number 1 in the universe since ancient times. However, even if you have the human monarch bloodline, you are absolutely not my match. Lu Feng was laughing crazily. His bloodline had been completely unleashed. At this moment, Lu Feng had already decided to let go. Such an opponent was simply something that could only be encountered by chance and not sought. Therefore, he did not want to hold anything back. Great demon true body. A golden color appeared. It covered every corner of Lu Feng's body, causing Lu Feng's body to be filled with the true essence of a demonic nature. In the next moment, the figure belonging to the human monarch began to transform, as if it had become a demonic existence. However, its face was hidden in endless unknowns and hazy. Chapter 267. It has appeared. It seems to be even more powerful. Guanglai young master was slightly excited. During the battle between Lu Feng and the 5 emperors, his most stunning performance was not the release of the human monarch bloodline. After all, the human monarch bloodline had appeared many times. What truly shocked and excited people was the appearance of the great demon true body. No one knew why this supreme king, the descendant of the human monarch, the true leader of the human race, would have such a pure demonic essence. However, those people understood that the power of the great demon true body was definitely a terrifying power. The strength of the enhancement was close to that of the human monarch bloodline. The human monarch bloodline was already invincible in the current era. Coupled with the great demon true body, Lu Feng was enough to shock millions of generations. The enhancement of the great demon true body. It allowed Lu Feng's combat strength to defy the heavens once again. The extreme boiling of the bloodline and the descent of the great demon true body allowed Lu Feng to reach the strongest realm when he fought against the 5 emperors in the past. At this moment, the power he possessed directly broke through all shackles. The current him actually had the strength to face any mid-level perfect stage martial artist head-on. It's too terrifying. It's really too terrifying. This kind of combat strength is completely heaven-defying. The Lu family has 2 kings. Could it be that the era of the human monarch is coming again? Could it be that the era of the human race is coming again? The Zhao family's young master exclaimed excitedly. He was completely shocked. At the peak of the evolution stage, he had the strength to fight against mid-level perfect stage martial artists. This kind of enhancement had completely stunned him. These people were only shocked by Lu Feng's terrifying enhancement. However, Zhao Dongxing, who was opposite him, was trembling because of Lu Feng's terrifying strength. Noble, overbearing, demonic, invincible. This was the feeling Lu Feng gave him at this moment. He really couldn't imagine that such a terrifying combat strength was hidden in this fragile body. Under this extreme pressure, Zhao Dongxing trembled. His whole body was indeed trembling. However, his trembling was not because of fear. It was because of excitement. At this moment, the hot blood that belonged to a martial artist completely awakened in his heart, his body, and his soul. Lu Feng was no longer a member of the junior generation. In his heart, he was an opponent who was worthy of him going all out. Let's fight. Lu Feng spoke, like an emperor from the 9 heavens descending to the mortal world. His voice contained a supreme holy will, making it impossible for others to refuse. Zhao Dongxing knew that if he didn't do anything, in that case there was no need to fight. Just this supreme sage sound alone was enough to completely crush him. After the most extreme suppression, it was the rebound that hit the bottom. At this moment, Zhao Dongxing no longer held back the strength of a perfect stage warrior. All of it erupted. In an instant, he unleashed an unparalleled attack. Although he hadn't refined any martial skills, this punch was already considered a supreme strike. All kinds of buffs and blessings. The terrifying attack was aimed at Lu Feng. The divine light in his eyes was dazzling. The emperor moved. In the face of such an attack, Lu Feng had dozens of ways to dodge, but if he dodged, then he wasn't the emperor. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to use the most violent attack. It was also the most powerful killing move. Boom! The sound waves fluctuated and impacted the sky steel. The entire arena shook. Just the collision of the sound waves was actually more powerful than the final collision of the 2 young geniuses. This was the strength of a perfect stage warrior. In the next moment, both of them disappeared. They had already entered a peak state and were in the midst of a collision. Countless attacks were unleashed and countless collisions occurred. The entire arena was shaking constantly. In a trance, everyone seemed to see the appearance of some blood. It was a kind of bloodline that flickered with 2 yellow colors. The intertwining of gold and imperial gold was extremely eye-catching. The blood dripped on the ground, producing a powerful fluctuation similar to that of a cultivation method. Legend has it that the blood of a god can kill hundreds of millions of creatures. Although the blood of a perfect warrior doesn't have such powerful magical powers, once the strength is used and the blood is filled with power, then it can definitely kill some beginner warriors. This Lu Feng, his blood has the bloodline of a human king and that incomparably terrifying demonic nature. The degree of strength is even more incredible. Even the blood of those demigods is probably not much stronger than him. The battle continued and countless collisions were heard. Finally, when a large amount of Lu Feng's blood appeared, the bright red blood began to sprinkle all over the void. That was the bloodline of a god that belonged to Zhao Dongxing. Everyone knew that the battle between the two men had reached an extreme state. The Emperor Lu Feng is indeed unparalleled and terrifying. No wonder he threatened to surpass his ancestor, the human king. With such a speed of improvement and such a terrifying combat strength, he really has a chance. A few months ago, he was at most facing the strength of a mid-stage warrior in the upheaval stage. But in just a few months, he had the strength to fight against a mid-stage perfect stage warrior. Such a speed of improvement was really frightening. In a trance, a long time had passed. Standing in the stands, Mu Xueyan was already stunned. At this moment, she finally understood Lu Feng's strength and Lu Feng's terror. Previously, when Lu Feng challenged Zhao Dongxing, she only thought that it was a crazy decision made by Lu Feng, who was stimulated by the battle between two genius warriors. But now she finally understood that he really did have such strength. Awesome! Awesome! Finally, the two of them slowly separated. They had already soared into the air and stood between two places, looking at each other. In their eyes there was boundless and vigorous fighting spirit. Zhao Dongxing looked at the countless wounds on his body, allowing the blood to flow out without taking any measures. His expression was one of madness. One had to admit that Lu Feng indeed had comparable strength to him now. This battle was the most hot-blooded battle he had fought since his debut. It was a kind of battle between pure warriors, without any conflict of interests mixed in. And Lu Feng was the same. At this moment, he was a blood-stained emperor, majestic as before, unchanging. In his eyes there was also a kind of frenzied excitement. Zhao Dongxing was like this. How could he not be like this? Since his debut, this was one of the most exciting battles he had fought. Lu Feng, next, let's start the real decisive battle. Zhao Dongxing's eyes became incomparably bright. He had already begun to condense a powerful force. Lu Feng knew that fighting to this extent, an ordinary exchange of blows could no longer determine the victor. Zhao Dongxing was finally going to use martial techniques. The next instant, Zhao Dongxing condensed countless powerful forces and finally moved. Desolate Era, as a direct descendant of the Zhao family, although his talent was not the strongest, Zhao Dongxing was qualified to learn the Zhao family's inherited martial techniques. This Desolate Era was a powerful killing move in the Zhao family's inherited martial technique, the Desolate Codex. Seeing the appearance of the Desolate Era, a strange light appeared in the eyes of the Zhao family's young master in the top luxurious private room. He knew how terrifying Zhao Dongxing was after using martial technique. It was just that he really could not imagine that a Lu Feng could actually force this uncle to use martial techniques. The era was brilliant, but with a thought it could make the entire era desolate and become a desolate world. This was the true essence of the Desolate Era. The surrounding space seemed to have faintly changed, becoming a lonely and dead world. In this place, all existences would be ravaged and completely obliterated. Similarly, Lu Feng also moved. The power of an emperor flourished, affecting the order of heaven and earth. One force to break all laws. He still did not use any martial techniques because Lu Feng wanted to try. He wanted to try using his strongest power to crush all thoughts. The great demon roared. That brand new great demon fused with the human monarch phantom was endlessly crazy. The next moment, it actually completely disappeared. It returned to Lu Feng's body, seemingly giving Lu Feng the strongest blessing. And at this moment, those countless wounds on Lu Feng's body once again sprayed out endless blood. These were all the craziest performances after Lu Feng's ultimate strength blessing. One punch, condensing all of his strength, he unleashed the strongest punch that shocked everything. Shattered. Who cares what desolate era it is? Who cares what era it is? In front of my punch, everything will be shattered. This was the supreme killing power of an era. Zhao Dongxing flew backward, blood from his wounds flying out again. And Lu Feng stood in the void, the dignity of an emperor revealed without a doubt. But the miserable state was not much better. All in all, although Lu Feng had the upper hand in the actual situation, there was no clear winner. Because this attack was too condensed, it caused Lu Feng's body to suffer heavy injuries again. Therefore, in general, the confrontation between the two sides this time was evenly matched. But Lu Feng's might gave rise to endless turbulence in Zhao Dongxing's heart. He used a cultivation technique, but what about Lu Feng? He completely relied on this most powerful violence, using supreme power to suppress everything, and actually completely shattered one of the stronger moves of his cultivation technique, Desolate Era. This kind of combat power was frightening, worthy of being the #1 bloodline since ancient times. Lu Feng, your strength is probably catching up to your ancestors. It's just that the current you is too young. You still don't have the qualifications to completely resist me. Great Desolate Era. Desolate Era, that was an era of desolation belonging to extinction. But this great desolate era was to create an era. Creation and destruction were diametrically opposed to each other. But in reality, creation was much more difficult than destruction. Therefore, this great desolate era was an even more terrifying ultimate skill. Space trembled, as if time and space were reborn, and an endless aura of desolation appeared. This was an era of desolation, a time and space full of the will of the Creator. In the attack just now, Lu Feng used the power of the Great Devil and the power projection of the human monarch bloodline. He might be able to unleash another attack, but in that case, his strength would fall to the bottom. What he did before was just to verify the thoughts in his heart. For Lu Fenglai, since he understood, then there was no need to try again. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.